You wake in the black stillness before dawn. The air inside your narrow sleeping space, already sharper than you'd like. The small stove has been out for hours, and your first breath leaves a ghostly cloud above your bedding. For a long moment you stay wrapped in your blanket, hearing only the muted creak of wood in the cold. The belfry waits above you, a silent bulk in the dark, its shape somewhere beyond the rooflines you cannot yet see. It is the middle of winter in Moscow in the 18th century. This frost is the kind that has no intention of lifting quickly. You know you will carry its bite with you into the tower. Bell ringers have always kept the early hours, their calls meant to wake the city before the light itself arrives. In this part of the world, at this time of year, that means stirring while others are still deep in their quilts. Your hands slide from beneath the blanket and meet the air like a wall of ice. You rub them together slowly, as though convincing them to move. Somewhere outside, under the great dome of dark sky, the ropes hang stiff from the bells. Their hemp fibers will be crusted with frost, each strand frozen into the shape it took last night. This is the normal order of things. No bell ringer here expects an easy grip in January. Bell towers in Moscow were built high, often with thick stone walls to muffle wind and lend a deep resonance to the chimes. The higher you climb, the more the cold seems to press against you from all sides. In the upper reaches, where the bells themselves hang, temperatures can be even harsher than in the streets below. That is where you will spend the next hours, sending sound into a city still locked in winter's grip. You shift your legs over the side of the cot, feeling the shock of wooden floorboards against your bare soles. The boards themselves seem to hold their own frost. A thin coating of ice has formed near the small draft from the window. The shutters rattle slightly with a faint wind, as though reminding you that the tower is waiting. A small oil lamp sits on the stool beside you. You strike a flint, the spark brief but bright in the darkness. The flame catches reluctantly, flickering as though reluctant to stay in such cold. This pale light is enough to cast faint shapes onto the wall. Your coat hung on a peg, a pair of boots with stiff leather ankles, and a woolen scarf draped like a coiled rope. You will need every piece of that clothing, and perhaps even more, to make it through the morning. Some bell ringers in these times were known to sleep in partial clothing wool stockings and undershirts, still on to avoid the shock of dressing from nothing in such chill. You have done the same. Your shift already warmed a little from your body's heat. You think of the quirky belief some older ringers pass around, that if you mutter a short prayer before your feet touch the ground, the frost will bite less when you step outside. Whether it is true or not, you find yourself doing it almost without thought. Historians still argue whether bell ringers of this period were officially part of the church's paid staff, or if many served simply for the small living space and a share of offerings. Records mention both arrangements, but the reality for most was a modest life, with few comforts beyond a warm corner and a bit of bread. The tower stands outside, unmoving, its bells hanging in the shadows like great metal moons. Soon they will speak, and their sound will cross the roofs, the river, and the frost-heavy air. But for now, the city sleeps, and you are the only one awake in this small circle of dim lamplight. You pull the coat from its peg, feeling the stiffness in the fabric, the way the seams have taken on the cold's memory. The boots follow, their leather reluctant to bend. You wrap the scarf twice, tucking the ends close against your neck. The door latch is cold metal against your palm. When you open it, the night's air rushes in, swallowing the small warmth of your room in a single breath. Your nostrils sting. Your eyes water in the first step into the winter street. Somewhere above, hidden in the black sky, the stars wait over the frost-covered city, and the belfry waits for you. You begin the slow process of dressing for the tower. The cold inside your small room is bad enough, but the climb into the belfry will be worse. Each layer is a defense, though each one also adds stiffness to your movements. You start with the thin linen shirt that has already cooled against your skin overnight, the fabric feeling almost damp from the air. Over this, you pull a heavier woolen tunic, its rough weave scratching faintly at your neck. Stockings come next, two pairs, one over the other. The first pair is thick, the second older and looser, but they add a small, important cushion between your legs and the frozen air. You have learned to wrap strips of cloth around your calves before pulling on the boots. Without this, the cold can bite right through the seams. The boots themselves are stiff from yesterday's snow, the soles hard enough that they knock on the floor when you set them down. You pull on your trousers, made from coarse homespun, then another overlayer that reaches almost to your knees. In this century, in Moscow's winters, such double garments are not luxury, they are survival. The same goes for your long coat, which is lined with sheepskin worn smooth over the years. It smells faintly of smoke from evenings spent too close to the stove, a scent you welcome now. Bell ringers in 18th century Moscow often wore heavy mittens rather than gloves, believing the shared space inside kept fingers warmer. You slide your hands into yours thick wool on the outside, lined with rabbit fur inside. Still, you know the rope's frozen fibers will bite through even these. The quirky trick passed down from older ringers is to rub a little tallow into the mittens before a long shift. They say it helps repel the frost that gathers on the rope. Whether it truly works, or is just an excuse to keep your hands smelling faintly of candle wax, you cannot say. Historians still argue whether Moscow bell ringers of this period worked set shifts strict hours from church orders, or if they simply kept watch and rang according to the seasonal rhythm of daylight and liturgical needs. The records are inconsistent. Some suggest careful timetables. Others speak of more fluid arrangements, where a ringer might stay in the tower for hours on end, resting between calls. You wind the long woolen scarf around your neck and face until only your eyes are visible. The first layer sits close against your chin. The second loops higher, covering your mouth and nose. You know the tower's wind will force its way through any gap. The final piece is your hat, a fur-lined cap with ear flaps tied down. It presses warmth close to your head, though the fur smells faintly of the stable, a reminder that animals, too, endure this same frost each day. Your breath is louder now inside the layers. Each exhale warms the air before your face, for only a moment before the cold steals it away. You glance at the lamp, its flame burning low but steady. You will carry it to the tower, not so much for light, though the stairwell will be black, but because the tiny heat at your side is something to hold on to. Outside, the frost has glazed the world in silver. The ground crunches beneath your boots, the sound sharp in the stillness. No one else moves at this hour. Even the street dogs, curled into themselves near warm walls, do not stir as you pass. The great shape of the church rises ahead, its belfry a darker shadow against the night sky. The climb awaits. You know that each step will bring you further from the ground's stored warmth and deeper into the frost's full hold. But you also know that when the bells sound, their voices will reach far, carrying through every frozen alley and across every snow-covered roof, and for a time, they will make the whole city feel awake together. You step into the base of the tower, where the air shifts from the street's brittle bite to a denser quiet that clings to stone. The door settles behind you with a wooden thud, and the sound is swallowed at once, as if the walls keep their own counsel. Your lamp raises a small circle of light, just enough to find the first stair. Frost has drawn a fine crust along the grain, crystals that glitter and fade as the flame passes. You test the tread with your boot and feel it answer with a low, steady creak that seems to recognize your weight. The staircase winds along the inner wall, wedge-shaped steps keyed into thick masonry. Each riser is worn shallow in the middle from years of careful feet. You know this climb the way the body warms, cools, and warms again, as drafts hunt you on the turns. Far above, the bells sleep in their frames. Near at hand, the rope holes draw a slow thread of air downward that smells of iron and snow. The lamp's glow brushes a peg hole, an iron strap, the seam where two courses of stone meet, and then the dark takes them back. Wood speaks as you go. The first creak is followed by a higher note as another beam adds its voice, and then by a small sigh where the stair eases itself under you. Wood that talks is wood that lives, and wood that lives holds. You lean forward, feeling the tread give and rise, an answer you trust. Your mitten grazes the wall and comes away dusted with a fine powder, like flour sifted through a coarse sieve. A colder draft slips from a narrow slit above. It carries the scent of the river and far-off smoke, and the particular emptiness of metal that has forgotten warmth. Bell towers in 18th century Moscow were often built with stout internal timber scaffolds nested inside stone, so the shock of ringing would travel through wood rather than crack the masonry. You have felt this many times. When the great bell moves, the frame takes the burden like a living spine, while the stone receives only a softened echo. That arrangement is why the steps answer plainly now. They belong to the same wooden body that steadies the bells. In this way, the tower feels less like a pile of parts and more like a creature quiet, old, and patient with those who treat it gently. Old ringers keep a small habit for mornings like this. Tap the first tread twice with your toe and greet the stairwell as you would a stubborn mule. The rule sits in no book, but the stair seems to prefer a respectful step. You keep the custom, amused at yourself, and content to be on good terms with wood. Another quirky trick says to tuck a pinch of straw in each boot for the first minutes of the climb so sweat will not chill your soles too quickly. You have done it more than once, and it buys a short, useful comfort before the straw flattens, and your feet must work for their heat again. Historians still argue whether bell ringers of this period routinely carried little bags of sand to scatter on icy steps, or whether such precautions were the sacristan's weekly duty. Some parish accounts list sand beside lamp oil and wicks. Others keep silence, as if every foot knew its way without help. You trust only what you feel. Now and then a grain crunches under your heel, and now and then nothing does. Either way, you climb as if the stair were a slow animal, steady, predictable, fond of patience. You round the first turn, and the stair answers with a higher creak, like a second voice joining the first. Your scarf traps a breath or two of warmth around your mouth before the tower steals it again. The lamp's flame licks taller for a heartbeat, then steadies. A thin ribbon of soot trails upward, a dark thread that marks your passage and dissolves. From somewhere above, a beam shifts a finger's width in its socket and settles. You picture the headstock's thick timbers bolted to the crowns of the bells and the leather pads that sit between iron and wood to spare both from harshness. A narrow window opens in the wall like a knife cut. The glass is filmed with winter feathers. You lift the lamp, and the warmth clears a small oval, revealing a pale view. A roof pitched under snow, chimney tops like chess pieces, and far away a lantern bobbing along a lane. The city lies quiet yet, pressed flat by cold. You set the lamp down and continue, counting not with numbers, but with breaths, the tower's arithmetic. The rope holes show themselves dark circles rimed with frost, edges rough from years of pull. A pulley turns so slightly you hear only a faint, leathered whisper. You add your own small sounds, a boot scuff, a wool rasp, a steadying breath. At the next landing, the stair tightens into its last spiral. The draft stands like a patient guard. It lays a flat hand against your cheek and holds it there neither cruel nor kind, only insistent. You shift the scarf, pinch the wick with a practiced touch, and watch the flame flare and then return to size. The soot line resumes its thin climb over the lamp glass. Your shoulders loosen within the coat. Your fingers find their slow prickle of returning blood inside the fur-lined mittens. The tower's voice narrows to wood, rope, and your breath. Some say a bell rung briskly on a freezing morning gives back a shy warmth to the touch and grows friendlier to the hand. A few ringers lean their backs against the metal between sequences to borrow that kindness through coat and wool. Whether the bell truly offers heat or only takes what you still have is difficult to judge. Still, the steady contact settles the body like a bench by a stove. You keep that thought for later, for the hour when the ropes are no longer still and the wind seems to look for seams. Another window appears, this one open to the air without glass. Snow has sifted through on earlier days and crusted in the corner, fine as salt. You glance outward. The sky remains black, but at the horizon there is a hint of iron gray where morning begins to think. The ropes above seem to pull at your attention, not impatient, only certain. You take the last turn. The wood accepts you without complaint, answers once with a long creak like a sigh given and done, and then falls quiet. You lift the latch of the small door to the ringing floor. It resists, then yields with a soft click. A cleaner wind slips through the louvers and moves across the planks in a slow sheet, carrying nothing but cold. You set the lamp by a stout post. Its light falls in a neat circle and shows the ropes at rest, furred with frost that glitters like crushed sugar. Each rope is a path between your body and the city's ear, a simple line by which morning will be made. You flex your fingers inside the mittens and feel the lining answer. You breathe once, twice. The wood remembers you. The stone knows your weight. The tower has finished its opening song door, stair, window, latch, and has settled into a poised silence that invites you to begin yours. The morning will come from plain things. Creak of stair, pull of rope, long voice of metal poured into frozen streets. For now, the climb is done. The tower keeps you in its hold. The lantern's small glow walks with you, making a quiet gold island on the gray boards, then letting the darkness close in again when you move. You set it on a low beam and watch how the light discovers the stone. Every shallow chisel mark, every line of mortar, a history of hands that worked in summers now long dissolved into memory. The flame gives just enough warmth to persuade a crust of rime to loosen around a nailhead. It beads, hesitates, and then slides away like a shy visitor who remembers another appointment. You lean a little closer, letting your cheek feel the faintest lift in temperature, as if the lantern were a friendly animal that cannot do much but refuses to leave. You take your time with the ropes. Frost has furred them overnight, and each hemp strand wears a thin coat that makes the fibers look older than they are. You run your mittened hand down one length, feeling the crunch give way to a softer pull. A light tap with your knuckles dislodges a small drift that falls soundless to the floor. The pulleys answer with minute movements, just enough to say they are ready when you are. You meet each rope like a neighbor at a doorway, no hurry. A nod, a brief wordless check that all is well. A simple truth steadies you. In this city and century, the bells themselves do not swing in the frames. Their iron hearts move instead, the clappers brought to the lips of metal by lines in a ringer's hands and feet. This is the old Russian way, the zvan, and you belong to it with an ease that needs no argument. The great crowns rest, the headstocks rest, the gudgeons rest. It is the clappers that travel, and your small motions that teach them their path. That fact sits in your bones like good bread. You draw a mitten off and risk bare fingers for a moment to test the leather thongs knotted to the clapper tails. The leather is stiff as bark where frost has had its say, but the knots are honest and hold true. You blow into your cupped hand and then onto the knot, watching a thin vapor bloom and vanish. An older ringer once told you to whisper 3 warm words to the rope before the morning's first sequence. Not any holy words, he insisted, just the names of things you wished were near a stove, a loaf, a quilt. He swore the rope would grow kinder. You have no proof he was right, but you whisper anyway, and the mitten goes back on. Historians still argue whether parish towers in 18th century Moscow kept a single fixed order for the morning blagovest, a slow, even toll on one bell, or whether each parish maintained its own small habits and tempos shaped by the ringer's ear and the priest's patience. Some manuscripts suggest patterns as tidy as a clerk's ledger. Others hint at a living practice, nudged by weather, feast, and local temperament. Your hands prefer the second story. The air tells you how slow the metal wishes to wake. You lift the lantern and pace the boards, searching for treachery underfoot. The flooring is set tight, but winter persuades even stout planks to open the smallest conversations at their seams. You find one place where a board has gone a shade soft from old damp. You step past it, marking it in your mind's small map of safe ground. You check the louvers as well, slats angled against the weather, mottled with a thin glaze of ice at their edges. Through them, the city keeps its distance and offers only a texture of dark. The river is present as a colder stripe in the air, a way your ear knows even when your eye cannot. You rest a hand against a bell's lip. Frost kisses your mitten and accepts your weight without protest. The curve is as calm and inevitable as the moon. You know where the tongue will want to land, the small patch of metal worn gentle by years of contact. A soft wipe with the cuff clears a whitening there. For a moment you lean your shoulder to the bronze, a borrower of steadiness. Some swear that if you stand thus for a count of 30 after the first peal, a thread of warmth returns through the metal to your coat. Others say the bell only drinks what you offer and thanks you with silence. You have found both to be true, depending on the morning and the mood you bring with you. You return to the lantern and trim the wick with a quick, practiced pinch between 2 bits of tin. The flame narrows, then steadies taller, throwing a cleaner light. Shadows of rope loops paint slow rings on the stone, like old halos that never quite learned to leave. You arrange your stance where the lines fall best to hand. One rope for the blagavist, another for the answering voice that will come later when daylight admits it has lost the argument. You roll your shoulders inside the coat until the seams stop objecting. Your toes drum in the boots to invite blood back to the edges. A crumbly scent of old tallow wanders from the lantern and settles in the back of your throat. You drink a mouth of kvass from the stoppered bottle and feel a small mercy move down your chest. A quirk passes through your mind, an old tip from a traveling ringer who claimed a smear of garlic on the inside of a scarf kept the chest warm and the voice steady through the earliest hours. You tried it once and found it mostly kept friends at a careful distance. Still, the memory makes you smile into the scarf, and the smile warms the skin just enough to matter. You run the back of a mitten along the nearest rope once more, and watch frost flake away like ground salt. The circle of light expands and shrinks with your breath. The boards wait, your weight centered, your hands easy. For a moment you simply listen. The tower speaks in its nearest vocabulary, a minute tap from a beam answering the shrinking cold, a tiny hiss from the lantern as the wick takes its correction, a dry whisper from the rope where fibers remember summer fields and the scythe. There is still the question of timing. No clock commands you here, only the gray of the horizon, the custom of your place, and the unhurried consent of stone and wood. You count the distance between breaths until a gentle shape takes form, 2 long draws, 1 soft pull, a rest, repeated as a body repeats walking. You imagine the sound crossing roofs and settling in kitchens where stoves are waking, slipping through stable doors where horses stamp and blow white into the air, finding a baker whose hand has learned to knead without looking. The city will accept the peels the way a house accepts footsteps on a familiar stair noticed, then fold it into its sense of being intact. You set the bottle aside. Your palms make small circles inside the mittens. The lantern's glow rests against the wall as if listening with you. The bell's iron heart hangs patient, a dark fruit ready to be brought to taste. You close your eyes only long enough to let the world shrink to 3 feelings: the give of rope, the solid answer of floor, the quiet promise of metal prepared to speak. When you open them, the boards are the same, the stone is the same, the ropes are the same, and yet they are changed because you are ready. You lift your right hand and take the first line with a pressure that is more greeting than grip. The tower receives the moment and does not argue. The lantern throws a last soft nod across the stone, as if to say that glow is one thing and sound another, and morning prefers the second. You breathe once, twice, make a small correction in your stance, then feel how the rope answers like a horse that has forgiven a clumsy rider. The city is still a study in black and iron gray beyond the louvers, but its edges are looser now, as if the day has remembered where it left its keys. You think of the stove that will be bright later, of bread that will crack softly when torn, of a quilt that will remember your shape this evening. You keep those thoughts at the edge of your sight, not as longing, only as polite future company. The bell waits, the rope agrees, the lantern approves by doing nothing. You let your weight fall the smallest measure, and the line tightens as if it too has been waiting to begin. Your hand closes more firmly on the rope, the fibers rough beneath the mitten, their stiffness carrying the night's cold as though it were another thread in the weave. You rock your weight back just enough for the line to lean towards you, not yet pulling, only speaking its readiness through a faint tug. The belfry holds its breath, the boards underfoot drawing still, the louvers giving no more than the occasional shiver. In this moment, before the first peal, the tower feels like a held note that hasn't yet found its voice. The rope's frost nips even through the wool, and you curl your fingers a little tighter. You take the first slow pull, nothing harsh, only enough to rouse the clapper from its resting place. It moves reluctantly, heavy with the cold, as though unsure it should be disturbed so early. You guide it forward, let it kiss the bell's bronze lip with a sound so soft you feel it more in your chest than in your ear. The bronze answers with a quiet hum, the kind that seems to pass into your bones rather than out into the air. You draw again, this time with a touch more weight, and the bell's voice opens a fraction wider. The note swells into the cold space, brushing against the stone walls and weaving around the timbers before finding the louvers. Outside, The frost seems to pause as the sound slips into the streets, stretching across roofs, fences, and snow-laden branches. The city doesn't wake all at once. Only a few shutters stir, a dog barks distantly, and somewhere a cartwheel crunches against packed snow. Bell ringers in 18th century Moscow often began the blagavest with these measured strokes, drawing the sound out slowly so the metal could warm just enough to speak clearly. In deep winter, this was not just habit but necessity. A bell struck too hard while frozen could sound dull, or, in rare cases, risk a small crack along its rim. Some old hands swore by giving the clapper a few courtesy touches first, as though coaxing an old friend out of bed. The quirky practice you remember now comes from a man you once met in another parish. He claimed that exhaling toward the bell between pulls carried human warmth into the bronze, making it sing sooner. You doubted his theory, but more than once you've caught yourself leaning close and letting a thin cloud of breath drift toward the metal, if only to see it dissolve into the frosted air. Historians still argue whether blagovest patterns were strictly dictated by the church in winter, or if individual ringers adapted them for weather and local custom. Surviving parish notes from the time often list vague instructions: ring as fits the feast and the season, leaving the specifics to the man in the tower. The soundscape of Moscow in those years would have been a shifting patchwork of rhythms, each bell tower answering its own invisible clock. You pull again, the rope stiff but yielding now in small degrees. The clapper finds its mark, and the bell's tone deepens. It rolls out into the half-light beyond the louvers, brushing along the frozen river's surface until it curls back faintly to your ears. You pause after 3 strikes, letting the silence take its shape. It feels thicker now, as though the bell has left a kind of after-image in the air, a vibration that will not leave until the next sound pushes it aside. The lantern's flame sways slightly with your motion, throwing shadows that dance along the ropes and timbers. You adjust your stance, shifting weight from one foot to the other to keep blood moving through your toes. The boots feel almost carved from wood in their stiffness, but each small step within them reminds you your feet are still your own. Outside, the faintest pale gray begins to gather at the horizon. It is not yet daylight, but the blackness has loosened its grip. The frost on the louvers catches this change first, tiny crystals winking in the dim. You listen to the way the bell's tone changes as the air stirs slightly sharper when a breeze threads through, slightly rounder when the tower's own stillness holds. You resume the slow rhythm. Draw, strike, let the tone swell, rest. The sound is a living thing now, each peal layering on the one before, until the tower feels warmed by it, not in temperature but in spirit. You think of the kitchens below where fires are being coaxed from embers, of the baker shaping his loaves, of the woman who will pour hot kizil into a clay mug and sit by her window to listen without thinking about the source. When your arm pauses between pulls, you lean a moment against the rope, feeling its quiet sway. The hemp, the leather, the bronze, each part holds its own memory of motion. You are simply the current running through them for now, the thread that makes them speak to each other. You draw again, and the bell's voice goes out over the city like a careful knock on every door. The frost remains, the air remains sharp, but the first work is done. The bells are awake, and so is the day. The first strokes have shaken the frost from the ropes in thin showers that fall like pale dust at your feet. A few stray crystals cling stubbornly to the fibers, catching the lantern light and winking like small secret stars. You pause between peals, letting the bell rest in its frame. The bronze holds a faint warmth now, not enough to chase the cold from your mittens, but enough that you can feel the difference when you touch the clapper's shaft. You step back, rolling your shoulders and flexing your fingers inside the wool. The rope still has some stiffness in it, but the fibers move more freely than they did minutes ago. You take the line in your left hand now, giving your right arm a moment's ease. This shift of stance sends your weight to the opposite foot, waking muscles you had left in idleness since before dawn. The boards beneath you creak in mild protest at the change, then settle again. The cold inside the belfry has its own quality, less cutting than outside, but deeper, more still. The walls hold it the way a cellar holds a season. You feel it in your bones differently than you do in the street. Out there, the cold presses. Up here, it seeps. The only answer is movement, and the bell provides that if you let it. Each pull draws not just on the rope, but on your whole frame, coaxing the stiffness from shoulders, elbows, and spine. 18th century Moscow bell towers were often designed with wide louver openings so the sound could carry far across the city's low roofline. That meant the ringers felt every wind that passed through, even the gentlest. In winter, those drafts could turn a steady shift into an endurance trial. Ringers sometimes hung spare strips of cloth, or even old cloaks, along the windward louvers, not to block the sound, heaven forbid, but to slow the worst of the air. You remember a quirky trick from an older man in the parish, who claimed that chewing on a small clove of dried juniper berry would keep the frost from settling in your lungs. You've never been entirely convinced, though you've done it on the coldest mornings, for no reason other than the comfort of its sharp, piney taste. You roll one in your cheek now, its brittle skin cracking under your teeth, and the faint, resinous tang blooms across your tongue. Historians still argue whether morning ringing in Moscow followed a strict seasonal schedule, shorter sequences in winter to spare both ringer and bell, or whether the length was fixed regardless of temperature. Parish records mention the need for prudence in frost, but leave much to the judgment of the man in the tower. In truth, most likely did what you do now. Trust the feel of the rope, the sound of the metal, and the state of their own fingers. You draw again, feeling the rope's arc grow easier. The clapper swings with more confidence, meeting the bronze in a strike that blooms warm in tone. The sound leans into the wind and carries beyond your sight. It's answered by small movements below. A door opening, footsteps on snow, the muffled thud of a broom sweeping a stoop. The city doesn't so much wake as it shifts in its sleep, making small adjustments before the day demands more. Between pulls, you glance toward the louvers. A thin edge of daylight has begun to press at the horizon. Not bright yet, just a paler shade of gray that stands out against the deep blue of the retreating night. The frost on the louvers catches this change, scattering it in fragments. The river, though unseen, makes itself known by the faint hollow in the sound when your bell's voice rolls across it and comes back softened. You keep the rhythm slow, deliberate. This isn't a summons for haste, but a steady presence. A reminder to the city that the world is turning, that breath still clouds in the air, that the day will come whether or not anyone is ready. The rope yields willingly now, as though the frost has given up its hold. Your arms work in measured arcs, each motion mirrored in the answering voice above your head. The lantern's flame flutters once as a stronger gust sneaks through, then steadies. Its light paints the ropes in gold, the frost in silver, the boards in muted browns. The mingling of these colors makes the belfry seem almost warm in appearance, though the air says otherwise. You stand in the center of it, moving with the rope's small sways, part of a pattern older than the tower itself. One more pull, one more tone spilling into the cold. You let it go and wait, listening to its echo fade into the city's bones. For a heartbeat, the frost seems to listen too. You lift your eyes to the bell's great mouth and see how the night has decorated it. A thin lace of snow clings to the lower rim where wind found purchase and laid a quiet edge along the bronze. It looks delicate, almost kind, as if winter had the manners to embroider the instrument before biting your fingers. You know this trim will shake loose as the clapper begins to work in earnest, but for now it rests there, a white smile waiting for a reason to change its shape. You reach up with a mitten and, without touching the metal, brush the air beneath it as though greeting a wild thing you don't wish to startle. The bell's surface shows a faint bloom of frost where your lantern light can find it. The casting is smooth but not perfect. You can feel with your eye the shallow swirls left by the mold. Small letters and a cross sit proud near the crown, softened by years of cold and dust. The bronze carries an old, patient dignity sturdier than your bones, and less troubled by complaints. When the clapper meets that rim, the snow fringe will leap away in small flurries, and the air will fill with glitter you can almost taste. You bring the rope into your hand again and give it a cautious draw, more sampling than summons. The clapper shifts as if waking from a heavy nap, and the bell offers a murmur rather than a speech. A few grains of snow release from the mouth and drift down past your cap's brim, so light that you feel them only when they become water on your cheek. You pause, letting the belfry settle, Then tug once more, and the bronze returns a fuller tone. This time the snow relinquishes more of its claim, powdering the air between you and the louvers. You think how winter loves neat corners and bell lips, how it decorates every right angle and softened curve, confident that morning will only make its handiwork shine, before sweeping it away. In 18th century Moscow, large church bells were cast from bronze copper married to tin tuned, not by shaving the rim in a tidy workshop, but by experience and ear, by the patient craft of founders who lived with heat in seasons when you lived with cold. Those bells, fixed in their wooden frames, did not swing. It was the clappers that moved, led by leather, rope, and a ringer's body in quiet conversation. The city's sound was built this way, tone laid upon tone from towers that respected both the stone that held them and the winter that tested them. A small, practical superstition wanders through your thoughts as you watch the snow edge loosen. An old ringer once insisted that if you give the bell a name under your breath on the first really frozen morning, it will keep its voice true all season. He swore that nameless bells sulked in frost. You never chose anything grand. No saints, no nobles, only simple names taken from things that stay. Birch, hearth, bread. Today, you say none of them aloud, but one visits the tongue anyway and sits there, content to be unspoken. Historians still argue whether ringers in this period routinely brushed bells clear before beginning, using a pole with a wrapped rag, or whether they trusted the first peals to do the work. Records mention rags and poles among tower tools in some parishes, but others speak of nothing more than ropes and a broom for the floor, as if snow on the lip were a matter for sound itself to settle. It may be that practice followed temperament, the careful clearing of those who liked their stage tidy, the tolerant patience of those who let the play begin as it stood. You test the rope again, this time drawing the clapper near the rim and holding it a breath before letting it meet the bronze. The strike is soft, but honest. A bright dust of crystals springs from the lip and hangs in the lantern's weak gold like a small astronomy. A few flakes find the back of your hand where the mitten has loosened and announce themselves as pinpricks that fade at once. The bell's voice stretches through the louvers, and when it returns from the river, it carries a rounder echo, as if a winter blanket had been laid across the water. The cold in the belfry has its habits, and today it behaves like a house guest who sits too long without speaking. It occupies the corners, settles in the boards, and borrows your breath whenever you fail to notice. You answer with movement, small adjustments of stance, careful loops of the rope around your palm when you rest, a shift from one foot to the other to wake the blood. The clapper grows more willing with each stroke, and the bell mouth sheds the last neat scallops of snow until only a thin, wet gloss remains where ice had been. You take a moment to peer along the rim. Tiny droplets have formed where the frost melted from touch and tone. They cling in even beads, reluctant to fall. Your lantern's reflection winks inside each one, a line of stubby stars marching the curve. If you lean close, you can smell the bell's faint metallic breath, a dry scent like sun-warmed coins remembered from a time when sun was a common acquaintance. You keep your cheek away. Skin that meets winter bronze learns a fast lesson in attachment. There is a small habit you allow yourself now. With the rope quiet in your hand, you count the beads aloud, not numbers, but names for them, as if each droplet were a visitor. Stove, window, loaf, quilt, flame. The counting is not for luck. It is to steady the mind and fasten it to plain things. The bell agrees to your method by offering another clean tone when you draw, free of any chatter at the lip. Below, the city makes the soft noises of beginning, a latch lifted, a horse snorting steam into the lane, a broom roughing the packed snow from a threshold. The bell's sound stands above these like a roof beam. The louvers accept it and pass it along without comment. From your side of the slats, the gray at the horizon is thicker, not yet light, only a sturdier suggestion of it. Your breath writes on the air and erases itself at once. You keep the tempo generous. There is enough cold to spare. There is no need to hurry it along. The clapper meets the bronze with the confidence that comes only after the first stubborn minutes, and the tone grows wide. It steps into the streets and puts a hand on each shoulder it finds, not to shake, only to let them know the day has knocked politely. The rim, clear now, looks different, as if the bell had cleaned its own face before addressing the world. You rest the rope and rub your mittened thumb and forefinger together, feeling the damp that frost left behind. The lantern's wick needs a pinch. You give it one with the little blades tied to its handle, and the flame tidies itself. Shadows shorten on the boards, and the bell waits like a teacher with time enough for every pupil. You take one more careful pull, watch the last bead jump from the lip and vanish, and decide the morning has crossed a line only you could see. The tower is pleased in its silent way. The wood has stopped commenting. The stone holds the cold without insisting upon it. The bell mouth, free of its snowy embroidery, looks practical again, less pretty, more itself. You are the same, less decorated by frost, more occupied with steadiness. You set your feet, accept the rope across your palm, and prepare to carry the voice a little farther into the city's woven breath. The snow that once edged the bell now edges your memory of it. A white margin around this small hour that will fade when the stove's door opens later, and you remember that warmth has its own eloquence. For now, metal and frost have spoken together and come to terms. You rest a moment, mittens on your knees, watching the mist of your breath mingle with the dust that hangs in the lantern light. Each exhale rises slowly, curling into the rafters before the cold flattens it against the dark. Your fingers, though wrapped in wool, feel the ache that comes from repeated, gripping, the kind of ache that doesn't burn, but settles in like a quiet visitor who intends to stay all day. You flex them, slow and deliberate, before taking the rope again. The morning still holds back its light. The louvers frame nothing more than shades of gray, faintly streaked where the river's breath moves in a different direction than the street wind. Through one slat, you see a scrap of snow tumble past, caught in an eddy between tower and sky. It spirals without urgency, turning over itself as if it has forgotten whether it means to rise or fall. You take another measured pull. The clapper swings with more willingness now, and the bronze answers with a note that feels rounder in your chest. The sound moves outwards, touches the edge of the city, and lingers a fraction longer before fading. You imagine it brushing over chimneys, brushing against the domes of nearby churches, and sliding down into narrow lanes where frost has turned every cobblestone into glass. Bell ringers in Moscow at this time often spoke of warming the bell, a slow process of bringing the metal's voice into its full tone without shocking it in the frost. The first minutes were patient work, half for the sake of the bell, half for the ringer's own limbs to loosen. There's no formal measure for when a bell is warm. It's simply the point when each strike feels like an agreement instead of an effort. You are close to that point now. A quirky bit of advice once given to you by a traveling ringer drifts back into mind. He swore that humming along with the bell, matching its note as best you could, helped keep your jaw from stiffening in the cold. You tried it once, quietly, and found it did nothing for your jaw but made the hours pass with a strange private company. The thought tempts you again. You hum softly as you pull, letting your voice blend into the bell's much greater one. The two sounds overlap for an instant before the bronze swallows yours whole. Historians still argue whether this practice of warming the bell was purely functional, or whether it carried a symbolic weight akin to a kind of morning blessing for the parish. Some sources suggest that clergy encouraged the gentler start, while others imply it was a ringer's own pride in his instrument, wanting the bell to sound its best even when no one was listening closely. You lean your shoulder briefly against the bell's frame between pulls. The timber is cold, but it's a solid kind of cold, the sort that stays put and doesn't try to creep into you unless you linger too long. The boards beneath your boots seem quieter now, no longer creaking at every shift of your weight. The belfry feels settled, its earlier restlessness eased by the steady rhythm you've kept. Beyond the louvers, a faint color begins to seep into the horizon, not the bright gold of a clear morning, but the muted rose of winter light filtered through cloud. It brushes the frost on the louvers, making them glow faintly like pale embers. The river catches a trace of it too, reflecting a dull sheen that moves with the slow current beneath the ice. You pull again, and this time the bell's note feels full. The air around you vibrates longer, the sound carrying a warmth that doesn't belong to the temperature. You imagine it seeping into the wooden beams, into the stone, into the city's own bones. For a moment, the belfry seems less a cold tower and more a vessel for something alive and moving. You pause, to take a mouthful of tepid kvass from the bottle at your feet. The taste is faintly sour, faintly sweet, a reminder of the bread it came from. The liquid is cool but not biting, and it settles into you with a small weight. A drop escapes down your chin into the scarf, where it will freeze if you don't brush it away. You do so with the back of your mitten, feeling the fabric stiffen where it catches the moisture. The louvers admit a sharper gust now, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke from a dozen unseen stoves. It's a good smell, solid, grounded, and it tangles briefly with the faint metallic tang of the bell above you. The two scents together make something you couldn't name, but that feels entirely like morning in Moscow. The rope hangs loose for a moment, swaying just enough to touch your leg. You take it again, steady your feet, and begin another slow sequence. The clapper moves like it's been awake for hours, and the bronze voice rolls out over the rooftops with the ease of speech between old friends. You breathe in, matching your rhythm to the bell's swing, and let the sound lead you into the next hour without hurry. The ropes, now softened from the steady work, fall into a gentle sway even when you release them between strokes. Their fibers look darker where the frost has melted away, a sign that your hands have coaxed them back to something close to their summer state. You run your mitten palm along one, feeling the faint dampness that comes when ice gives up its hold. Tiny droplets cling to the ridges of the hemp, catching the lantern light like beads of glass before slipping quietly to the floorboards. You draw the rope again, slow and even, and the clapper answers as though the two of you have reached an understanding. The bell's tone is richer now, less brittle at the edges, the sort of sound that travels further and stays in the ear longer. It pours out through the louvers, spreading across the snow-heavy city in long, deliberate waves. The river, under its crust of ice, sends back a softened echo that rolls in under the main note, like a low companion voice humming beneath a song. In 18th century Moscow, bell towers were not only calls to prayer, but also part of the city's unspoken clockwork. Their voices marked the hours, the feasts, the warnings, and the quiet beginnings of market days. A ringer who knew his bell well could make it speak in more than one tone, not by changing the bell itself, but by altering the pull. Shorter or longer swings, a gentler release, a firmer draw. The work was a language built in vibration and air. You remember a quirky bit of advice from a visiting ringer years ago. He claimed that if you matched your breath to the bell's swing, exactly inhale as the clapper draws in, exhale as it meets the bronze, you could ring for twice as long without tiring. You never proved or disproved it, but on mornings like this you often fall into that pattern naturally. The result is a strange sense that the bell is breathing with you, the two of you sharing the same lungs for a time. Historians still argue whether bells in winter were ever rested between sequences for the sake of the metal, or whether the pauses were purely for the ringer's benefit. Some documents suggest that long, unbroken ringing was avoided in deep frost, while others tell of hours-long sequences without mention of harm. Perhaps the truth was simpler. Each tower had its own pace, set by the stamina of whoever stood at the ropes. You step back for a moment and look upward. The bronze bell looms above, its surface a patchwork of light and shadow from the lantern. The snow that once clung to its rim is gone now, replaced by a faint sheen of moisture that will soon freeze again when your work is done. The clapper sways gently, its head dark against the pale rim, waiting for your next command. Outside, the first hints of true daylight begin to mark the skyline. The edges of rooftops show sharper against the sky, and the frost on the louvers gleams as if dusted with powdered silver. A few crows cross the open air between towers, their wing beats sending a ripple through the stillness before the bell's voice covers them. From the street below comes the muffled clop of hooves, the slow roll of a cart, and the creak of axles in the cold. The city is not rushing. Winter rarely allows for that. You pull again, letting the bell's voice roll out in a long arc. You can feel the vibration travel down the rope, through the beam, into the floor beneath your boots. It's not a sharp jolt, but a deep, slow thrum that settles into your bones. The sound feels older than the tower itself, older than the city around it, a tone that has been poured into the same air for decades, maybe centuries, and will continue long after your hands have left the rope. The lantern's light begins to look weaker against the growing day, but you keep it lit, Its small warmth matters more than its glow now. The rope in your hand feels almost supple, a far cry from the stiff, icy length you first gripped before dawn. You adjust your stance, leaning slightly to one side to ease the pull, and the motion feels smooth, practiced, without effort. The bell speaks again, and the note travels outward like a slow tide. Somewhere below, a door closes, a pot lid lifts, a child laughs briefly before being hushed. The sound returns to you softened, carrying with it the morning's first signs of life. You keep the rhythm steady, not to urge the day forward, but to make sure it has a foundation to rise from. When you pause, the belfry settles into a silence that is not quite empty. The boards hold the memory of vibration. The ropes swing faintly, as if still considering the next pull, and the air carries the last threads of bronze into the corners before letting them go. You stand in that space a moment, listening to nothing and everything at once. Icicles have gathered at the frayed ends of the ropes. Slim and glassy, like teeth the tower grew in the night. They tap each other lightly when the line sways, giving a brittle music so quiet you hear it only when you stop breathing. You lower the lantern to see them better. The light slips through their clear bodies and throws thin bars on the boards, a cage drawn by winter and unlocked by sound. When you touch one with a mitten knuckle, it gives a small, exact crack and drops, shattering into sugar on the floor. You kneel to clear the worst of the glass from the fibers. If the icicles remain, they will make the rope stiff near the hand. And when the clapper asks for a quick answer, the line will answer late. You pinch a fat shard and twist. It shears off cleanly, leaving a wet tassel that darkens the hemp. Another shard breaks and slides under the board, and a third stays stubborn until you give it a small scold with the back of your mitten. The floor receives the fragments with a soft ticking sound, as if the cold were counting you. A simple courtesy to the rope follows. You rub the thawed ends with a strip of coarse cloth kept for this work. Not to dry them, there is no dryness up here in winter, but to smooth the fibers so they will not snag your mittens when the pace must quicken. The rope, freed of its jewelry, looks more itself, a tool rather than an ornament of weather. When you lift the line again, the tassel bends and agrees to be useful. In 18th century Moscow, ropes for the zvan were generally of hemp, twisted thick, sometimes spliced and respliced over years as wear demanded. A well-kept rope could serve through many winters if watched, dried when possible, and turned so that the burden did not always fall on one side. The bell frames accepted such care as part of the ordinary rhythm of the tower. Wood and fiber, living neighbors to stone and bronze. This is not romantic knowledge. It is as practical as bread, and just as daily. There is a quirky habit you allow yourself when the icicles are particularly fine. You choose the smallest one and slip it gently into your mouth, letting it crack and vanish on your tongue. It tastes of nothing, almost, except the faint dust of the belfry, and the clean cold that has known nothing but air and quiet. An older ringer showed you this trick and said it taught the mouth the day. Perhaps it does nothing at all, but the tiny act of theft from winter makes you feel briefly equal with it. You wipe your lip with the back of your mitten and return to the work. Historians still argue whether winter towers in this period were ever curtained with oiled cloth to soften drafts and spare the ropes from icing, or whether such measures were thought needless or even disrespectful to the bell's duty to carry. Parish inventories list cloth now and then, no note on its use. A few travel diaries mention hung canvases in cold churches. No certainty they reached the belfry. The record leaves the question suspended, as your louvers do the air. Perhaps some towers were wrapped like careful throats, and perhaps most met the weather with bare slats and patience. You gather the fallen ice with the broom kept in the corner, bristles bound with twine, handle polished by years of ungloved hands in warmer months. The shards skitter ahead of the brush and collect in a bright nest near the base of a post. You nudge them toward a gap between boards so they will be out of your path. The little heap slides away, meets a colder pocket below, and stills. The belfry is neater, which makes you feel warmer whether or not you are. A gust threads the louvers and skims the ropes, and you watch how the fresh-wetted tassels answer, bending without complaint. You take the line again and test the weight. The clapper swings as it should, willing and exact, and the bell's answer steps into the morning with unfrayed shoes. Sound lifts, spreads, and returns like a tide that has memorized every stone along the shore. You keep the strokes even, letting the city learn the day by degrees. The lantern flame, now paling against a slow brightening, points out small details you missed earlier. A bead of resin that bled from a beam in some long-ago summer and hardened like amber. A nail whose head carries a faint ring of rust, the color of winter apples. A spider's thread strung from a rope to the post, now a stiff wire of ice. You think briefly of seasons, how the same stair accepts mud in spring, dust in summer, leaves in autumn, and this precise glitter now. The tower keeps all those memories and tells none of them, unless you ask with your eyes. You pause to work warmth into your toes. The boots answer with a dull, approving thud, the sound of felt and leather accepting their role. Volanki felt boots are common in this city and century, and though yours have known better days, they still hold heat when movement gives them reason. You stamp once more, not in impatience, but in treaty with circulation, and feel the blood return like a polite guest who took the hint. The rope, cleared of ice, rewards you with a surer grip. You shorten your hold for a sequence of closer strokes, then lengthen it again to give the clapper a broader swing. The bell's voice changes color accordingly, not in pitch, but in the way it fills the cold, sometimes a narrow beam, sometimes a wide lantern thrown across the roofs. Below, a door opens, a bucket thumps. Someone laughs softly and coughs after, as if startled by their own cheer. You let the bell answer them without haste. Another icicle has formed at the very tip of a different rope, a fast-made needle from the breath of the room and the melt of your earlier work. You reach and snap it with 2 fingers before it can grow ambitious. The shard stings your glove and falls like a word you thought better of saying. You toss the broken piece aside and feel the rope's end flick happily, freed of its weight. You drink a mouth of kvass, cap the bottle, and tuck it against a beam so it will not wander with the floor's vibration. A thin rim of ice is formed inside the lip where your last sip left a film. It cracks when you set the bottle down, the faintest complaint. You smile into your scarf at the sounds, the tiny theater of cold things speaking in their smallest voices. The bell does the loud talking, everything else, the small talk. You begin another measured round. The bell gives itself without resistance, and the air takes it out and returns it richer. The ropes lift and fall with you, obedient and confident, the tassels clean, the fibers willing. You hear the river again under the tone, a roundness that is not echo so much as the city's own chest, answering the instrument. The light outside is still only a thickening of gray, but the gray has learned to lean toward day. You end the sequence and rest your hands at your sides. The tower holds the last sound for a breath and lets it go. The icicles you broke are already gone from your mind, which was their hope all along, to be noticed only long enough to be removed. The rope ends hang neat, damp, and serviceable. You stand with them in the paused air, considering nothing in particular, which is a kind of warmth. Then you set your feet again, set your hand again, and let the bell speak once more, clean-lipped, clear-voiced, unconcerned with the night's toothy ornaments that tried to make tools into decoration. Morning prefers the unadorned. So, you find, do you? The air in the belfry is thick now with the mingled scents of hemp rope, old wood, and the faint metallic breath of the bell after repeated strikes. Each inhalation feels almost textured, as though you are breathing the history of every morning rung here before yours. You steady your stance and let your eyes travel to the far corners of the chamber, where frost has crept along the seams between stone and timber, sketching thin white maps only the cold understands. Between pulls, you rub the palm of your mitten against the boards, feeling the fine dust rise like a silent smoke. The floor here never fully loses its coating. Years of bronze vibration have shaken particles into every joint, and the drafts carry them in small, invisible eddies. When the lantern's light moves just so, you catch these swirls in midair, and for a moment the room feels like it's full of pale, lazy snow that has forgotten how to fall. You lean into the next stroke, drawing the clapper toward the rim, and the bronze answers with a sound so steady it feels as if it were always there, only waiting for you to uncover it. The note holds itself in the air, wrapping around the beams, slipping through the louvers, and sliding over the frozen rooftops. You imagine it dropping into alleyways like a coin into a pocket, noticed only when someone's ear happens to find it. In the Moscow of this century, bells were not merely for timekeeping or worship. They also marked community life, fires, processions, even the rare joy of peace after trouble. A skilled ringer could alter the pace and grouping of notes to send a message understood without words. Here, though, on an ordinary winter morning, your only duty is steadiness. A voice in the cold that reminds the city it is still connected from steeple to street. A quirky habit you've kept from your early days comes now without thinking. Between pulls, you rest the rope gently against your cheek, mitten and all, as if checking the warmth of a sleeping child. The fibers press faintly into your skin, a reminder that you and the rope share this work equally. Some ringers said it was a way to listen with your face, claiming they could feel the tone through the hemp. You've never put that to the test, but the quiet contact makes the long hours more companionable. Historians still argue whether towers like this one kept a written sequence for ordinary days, or whether the sound was guided purely by a ringer's judgment and habit. Surviving ledgers mention the great feasts and fasts in detail, but on the matter of common mornings they are vague. Ring as the morning dictates appears more than once, a phrase that could mean anything from a handful of measured strokes to a full quarter hour. You watch your own breath drift toward the louvers, carried sideways by a sly draft. Beyond them, the light has strengthened just enough to show where snow has crusted over roof edges. The weight of it bends small gutters, and in one place you can see a line where yesterday's melt refroze into a narrow blade of ice. Somewhere, a door bangs against a wall and is pulled shut again, the sound muffled as though wrapped in wool. The bell's rim glistens now where the frost has given way to a fine sheen of moisture. You resist the urge to touch it. Skin to metal in this cold is a contest you always lose. Instead, you let your eyes follow the curve up to the crown, where iron bolts and straps hold it fast in the frame. The wood there is dark with age, rubbed smooth by years of settling, and the small shivers of vibration that each note sends upward. You take another sip from the kvass bottle, noting the ring of ice forming anew at the neck. It cracks quietly when you drink, the sound as sharp and thin as a twig breaking underfoot. The liquid is no warmer than the air, but it tastes of bread and fermentation, grounding you in the work. You set the bottle down by your boot and give the rope another slow, deliberate pull. The tone blooms again, richer now that the bell is fully awake. You imagine it weaving itself into the city's waking sounds, the scrape of a shovel on stone, the muted thud of logs being set into a stove, the yawn of a horse before its first step into the street. None of these things rush. In winter, they never do. The bell fits itself among them, not leading, not following, simply present. When you pause, the silence that follows feels less empty than it did before dawn. It is a shared quiet now, shaped by what has passed through it. You roll your shoulders, shift your weight to the other foot, and take the rope again. The next pull comes almost of its own accord, your body moving with the calm certainty of someone who knows this will not be the last bell he rings before the day is done. You shift your weight forward, drawing the rope once more, and feel the clapper respond with the easy swing of something that has shed all reluctance. The bell's voice comes strong but unhurried, filling the air with a resonance that seems to cling to the frost itself. You watch the sound leave you through the louvers, a thing without shape yet somehow visible, in the faint stirring of air against the morning stillness. The boards beneath you have taken on a muted rhythm of their own. With each pull, they give a small, almost friendly creak, as though keeping pace in sympathy. Your boots, warm slightly from movement, no longer feel like blocks of ice. There is a comfortable dullness in your toes now, the kind that says the cold has been persuaded to retreat just a little. You glance toward the lantern, still burning though the growing daylight is beginning to rob it of purpose. Its flame wavers with each movement of your arm, throwing a shifting halo across the rope in your mittened hands. That glow makes the frost in the rope's fibers glimmer faintly, as if reluctant to surrender entirely. The tassels at the rope ends, damp from melted ice earlier, now hang straight and darkened, like hair after a long walk through snow. In 18th-century Moscow, a bell ringer was as much caretaker as musician. The instruments were expected to serve for decades, sometimes centuries, and every small act clearing ice, easing tension on the rope, listening for the difference between a warm strike and a cold one, was part of the work. A tower could forgive a missed note. It did not forgive neglect. You remember a quirky bit of advice from an older ringer. He told you never to spit in the belfry on a cold day, lest it freeze mid-air and return to strike you. You laughed at the time, thinking it only a joke, until you saw a ringer in another parish test the warning and end up wiping a frozen fleck from his own coat. Since then, you've kept your breath and your hands busy, leaving nothing for the air to claim. Historians still argue whether bell ringers were considered craftsmen in their own right or simply attendants to the church's property. Wages, where recorded, varied wildly. Some ringers were paid in coin, others in food and firewood, and some, it seems, received only a place to sleep and the right to stand in the tower. The work itself changed little across these arrangements. The bell had to be rung, and it was rung. Your next pull sends a note deep into the city's quiet. You picture it slipping down alleys, brushing against market stalls still hidden under tarpaulins, and settling on the roof of the bakery where the first loaves of the day are rising. A faint echo returns from somewhere, far off, a reply from another tower, perhaps, or just the sound bending back from a wall you cannot see. You take a moment to roll your shoulders and flex your hands inside the mittens. The movement sends a small heat into your arms, which you carry into the next pull. The bell answers without hesitation, the clapper striking clean and true. The tone has lost the thinness it had before dawn. It now has weight, a slow spreading warmth that lingers after the sound fades. Beyond the louvers, the sky is a soft slate color, the clouds heavy with unfallen snow. The wind is light, enough to carry the scent of distant chimneys into the belfry. It mingles with the dry metallic smell from the bell and the faint earthy aroma of the wooden beams. The combination is so familiar you could name the season with your eyes closed. You look down briefly toward the street. The world is still muted, as though wrapped in a thick blanket. A single figure moves along the lane, head bent against the cold, footsteps leaving clean prints in the snow. You wonder if they hear the bell as company or simply as part of the day's background. Either way, the sound finds them. You return your focus to the rope, keeping the rhythm steady. The pull, the strike, the swell of tone, the gentle pause. It is a cycle that feels less like labor now and more like breathing. The belfry accepts the pattern, holding the warmth you've built into the metal, the rope, and yourself. You know you could keep it up for hours if need be, and that, in winter, sometimes you do. You notice how your breath writes itself into the air, and then erases the line before anyone can read it. Each exhale leaves you as a small cloud, spreads into the chill, and vanishes among the rafters where a fine flower of dust waits for any excuse to move. When the lantern shifts, that dust loosens and turns in patient spirals, so light you cannot tell whether it falls or floats. You pause a moment to watch it behave like a very quiet snowfall that has forgotten the ground. The rope rests against your mitten, damp where frost has melted, and you warm it by degrees too small to brag about. A thin draft, more suggestion than wind, nudges the dust into your breath's path. The two make a pale ribbon that drifts toward the louvers, a small banner with no audience. It brings the dry smell of old wood, and the faint metallic tang that clings to bells and never quite leaves your clothes. You take another careful pull. The clapper slips forward and touches the bronze with a tone you feel at the tongue before the ear claims it. The sound walks out into the morning and returns as a patient hum you can sense through your boots. Your breath follows, a late traveler, and writes a second, thinner ribbon where the first one faded. You remember what your teacher said long ago. Breathe as if the bell is breathing too, so neither of you gets ahead of the other. It sounded foolish when you first heard it. It works better than it deserves. In 18th century Moscow, towers like this were cut with narrow slits and fitted with wooden louvers that traded warmth for reach. The arrangement was practical and made the air inside a participant in the ringing never still, always nudging dust from one corner to another. A ringer lived with that companionship. You inhaled rope, sawdust, cold stone, and the clean dryness that frost leaves behind when it is finished speaking. These are not romantic scents. They are simply the air of work. You shift your stance a thumb's width. The dust answers like a small congregation of moths that forgot their purpose. A quirky bit of lore says, if you cough 3 times before the first full sequence, you won't cough again all morning. You never prove the charm, so you keep the throat quiet and let the scarf mind its task. Even so, a polite tickle visits and departs winter's manners at the door. Historians still argue whether ringers were taught formal breathing patterns, discipline counts to match long sequences, or whether each man learned first by doing and then by regretting. A few notes speak of measured respiration during fast peals. Others say nothing at all, as if instruction were only ever a shouted "again" from the stair. Your own answer is simple. The bell taught your lungs, and the dust wrote the lessons where the lantern could find them. You ease the rope through your hand and feel the hemp drag gently, each fiber announcing itself in the glove. A tiny halo of dust lifts from the strands as they move. You hold your breath and let it pass. Then take air again through the scarf, slow and low so the throat won't complain. The cloth tastes of wool, smoke, and the faint memory of last week's onions, which the scarf borrowed from the kitchen without asking. Even the smallest smile warms the skin under the fur lining. Even that sends a little fog into the light. The lantern's flame trembles at a draft you cannot find. Its glow makes the dust look like snow, seen from far away, a quiet storm that never lands. The bell, warmed now to its winter voice, accepts another draw of the clapper and gives a note that seems to steady the dust for a heartbeat before dismissing it. You wonder if anyone below imagines this small weather inside the tower, while the bigger weather outside sets frost between every house and the street. You let the rope rest and step to a window slit. Your breath finds the opening and departs in a thin stream that is lost at once in the gray. The air that returns tastes rinsed by distance. Down there a horse snorts, a wheel complains. The bell's last word rides the river and comes back wearing the soft coat that water gives to sound in winter. You keep that quiet in your chest for a moment before you turn back. A simple truth of the work. Dust will always find you, and breath will always reveal it. You wipe a sleeve across the nearest beam and leave a damp streak where frost and powder colluded. The streak freezes at once and draws a crooked line as neat as a quill could make. You decide to leave the other beams alone. There is no need to rewrite the tower. You take the rope again and try a slightly quicker pulse. Not hurried, only nearer together. The clapper answers with a livelier swing, and the bronze returns a tone a shade brighter, but no less calm. Your breath meets the new tempo and scatters the dust in faster curls that flash and fade in the lantern's small kingdom. The floor gives one approving creak and then holds its peace. Think of the people who will pass under this sound without remark. The baker turning loaves, the widow bending to her stove, the boy sent for water who will kick his bucket once to hear what kind of morning it is. None of them will think of your breath or the tower's dust. They don't need to. They will take the bell with their bread and their tasks, and the day will run on those rails. Another small touch. You lift the scarf for one deep, deliberate breath to remind your lungs they still belong to open air. The cold bites polite but clear. You cover up again and hold the next pull a fraction longer, so the clapper reaches the rim, as if pausing at an old friend's doorway to knock twice instead of once. The note that follows presses the dust flat for a heartbeat. Then the room forgets and returns to its thousand drifting errands. Your bottle of kvass waits by the post. You drink and feel its subtle bread, made thin enough to pour. A rim of ice grows at the lip again, fussy and precise. You set it down and take the rope with both hands for a last measure in this sequence. The bell speaks evenly, without quarrel or complaint. Your breath writes another brief line into the rafters, and the dust edits it away with the gentlest eraser. By the time you rest, the lantern is almost unnecessary, but you leave it lit for company. The dust keeps its small procession. Your breath keeps its brief letters. The bell waits, sure you will ask it to speak again. You stand inside these simple certainties and feel, for a moment, warmer than the room admits. You drift toward the narrow window slit, where the frost has made its own idea of stained glass. Ferns of ice lace outward from the edges, each frond splitting into smaller and smaller mimicries until the whole pane is a quiet forest. You lift the lantern, and its glow climbs into the pattern, warming a thumbprint-sized oval you can look through. The world beyond comes in pieces, roof edges first, then a church dome shouldering up behind them, then the faint line of the river wearing a dull pewter skin. You breathe gently, and the oval fogs, then clears as if the city were blinking back at you. The cold keeps its hand on your cheek where it faces the slit. The louvers hum softly with the air and make a little theater for the morning. Crows step from one roof ridge to another. Carters lean into traces, and a woman with a shawl like yours, only brighter, crosses an alley with a pail that scuffs the snow. The bell's last tone is still traveling out there. You see none of it move to its rhythm, and yet everything seems to take its measure from it. You tip the lantern a little higher, and the frost relents in a second, larger teardrop of clear. The glass crackles faintly, talking in a language the cold taught it at dusk. You lean closer, careful of metal and skin. Winter panes are old bargainers. They will trade you one view for a patch of your face if you are careless. You keep a mitten between you and the sill, and let your breath do the rest. In 18th-century Moscow, church towers often kept these narrow windows for the simple business of watching weather and city no glass in some, thick, imperfect panes in others, so the ringer could read the wind and decide how to aim the sound. A turn of the head or a small change in stance could help the note spill a little more toward the market or the river, like turning a jug to pour along its lip. The city had many such quiet adjustments, tuned by hands no one noticed. That is the plain fact. Towers watched, and the ringer watched from them, and sound was steered by nothing more than bodies that learned the air. A quirky bit of practice comes to mind as you wipe a third oval into the frost with the back of your mitten. An old ringer swore you should mark the glass with a tiny cross of breath before a feast day peal so the view would remember the right part of the city to hear first. He said the cross turned drafts into allies. You tried it once and found only that the mark made you smile, and smiling warms the face more than any trick. Even so, your exhale makes a soft cross now, and the smile returns. Call it superstition, or a small loan to comfort. Historians still argue whether ringers regularly kept weather notes, wind, cloud, and temperature passed down to guide future hands, or whether each man relied only on his senses and the old sayings. A few surviving scraps list winds and feasts side by side. Most ledgers stay silent, as if the tower trusted memory more than ink. The uncertainty leaves room for what you are doing now, reading frost and sky with no book but your own breath. You stand square to the window and let the bells quiet left in the room settle against your back. The city shows itself in rows now. Near things are sharp, a chimney frilled with ice, a dovecote wearing a white cap, the black shadow where a roof overhang keeps frost from biting. Far things are soft, a line of trees that could be smoke, a paler band that must be the river ice. Between these layers, people make their first trades with the day, one step out the door, then another, one breath, then another, a glance up at a sky that is not yet decided on sun or snow. The rope brushes your calf to remind you it exists. You step back from the window and set the lantern down. On the floor, frost fallen from the pane makes a glittering comma by your boot. You leave it there as if punctuation matters in a room that speaks mostly in tone. The bell waits with its patient round mouth, the clapper a dark fruit hanging inside. You rub your thumb along the mitten palm to wake the grip. You test a new sequence, slower than the last, as if the eye that looked outward must now be matched by an ear that looks inward. The clapper touches and withdraws, giving the bronze a voice that arrives like careful footsteps on packed snow. It does not urge the city, it accompanies it. You choose a pause, longer than before, and the silence after the note stands up straight, hoar-frost still, so you can see its shape. In the corner by the post, a thread of spider silk you noticed earlier sets itself trembling at each stroke. It has collected a line of tiny ice beads, a necklace hung by accident on a cord no bigger than a hair. The bell's breath moves it. The draft steadies it. The lantern forgives it and throws a little shine along its length. You think how often the small things keep the room honest while the loud thing does its work. You check the window again. The teardrops you warmed have begun to rim with a delicate fringe, as if edges prefer their own designs to any you grant them. A cart passes below with a crate lashed in rope that looks like yours in miniature. A boy sits atop it, wrapped like an onion, his cheeks the only thing winter could not be bothered to cover. He glances up once, not at your tower, but toward the river, where the sound rides gentler. Then he looks forward again, as people do. You sip from the kvass bottle and find the meniscus thinly frozen, a glass lid that cracks with a tiny bravado when you tip it. The taste returns you to kitchens, to the dough that began this drink, to the smell of the corner where loaves cool on racks near a window that sweats in summer. Such thoughts do not make you hungrier or warmer. They only remind you that the bell speaks into houses where those things are happening. That is enough. You lay one mitten briefly against the window frame itself, testing its truth. The wood is a different kind of cold. From the metal, a holding chill that does not seize the skin so quickly. It is the difference between a winter handshake and a winter stare. You choose the handshake and step away. The rope waits where you left it, honest and damp and dark, ready to be useful. You reset your feet and aim a touch more of the sound toward the market quarter, a matter as simple as turning your shoulders a finger's width and letting your body tell the clapper a slightly new story. The bell answers with the same note, but the room hears it lean. Outside, that lean will find bread, scales, and gossip before it finds the riverbank. The city will not notice the distinction. It will only behave as if morning has gathered itself properly. For a breath you do nothing. Just stand between the frost you opened and the bronze you warmed, and let both have their say. The window holds its lace. The bell holds its silence. The rope hangs like a line drawn by a careful hand. You are the small hinge in the middle. The thought is neither grand nor heavy. It is simply the kind of thought that keeps you standing where you are, until standing becomes movement again. You pull, the note goes out, threads the louvers, and does what notes do, touches what it touches, and leaves the rest for later. You watch the frost near the teardrops feather inward, busy with their own architecture. You listen for the soft, round echo that returns from the frozen river. When it arrives, it is just as polite as you expected. You lower the lantern's wick a hair, not to save oil, the bottle near it will last, but because the day now has its own lamp. The room changes color by hardly changing at all. The gray chooses a warmer gray and calls that progress. You nod, as if you had asked for it. The bell waits to be asked again. The window keeps its private garden of ice. The city keeps its paths and errands. You keep the rope. Between these three keepings, the morning advances by the width of a breath. You lift the rope again, feeling how the hemp has grown soft under your hand. The stiffness of dawn long gone. The damp that once clung at the tassel's end has begun to dry in the slow air, leaving a faint, salt-colored bloom where the water retreated. You pull, and the clapper's weight answers without argument. The bell gives a note so full it seems to reach around the room and hold it still for the space of a breath. The louvers catch the sound and spill it into the street, where morning is now a more definite thing. Shadows are shorter, edges sharper. A man with a broom sweeps his threshold, each push of bristle sending a puff of frost into the air. A cart rolls past slowly, its driver hunched in furs, gloved hands wrapped around the reins. The horse's breath steams ahead of them, like small clouds seeking the next turn. The bell's voice touches all of it without claiming ownership. The lantern's flame is small now, no longer the room's main light. Its glow has grown softer, more like a companion at the edge of a conversation than a speaker in it. You keep it lit, partly for the comfort of having it there, partly because its warmth, small as it is, still reaches your knuckles when you pass too near. In 18th century Moscow, the ringing of this hour was not a command, but a presence. It did not summon all to church or declare a feast. It simply placed itself in the day, like a pillar in the square, something the city could lean against without thinking. Ringers learned to match their pace to that role. Steady, neither eager nor reluctant, letting each note fall into place as naturally as a breath. You remember a quirky suggestion from an older hand. Always let your mind wander to something ordinary. While you wring soup on the stove, socks drying by the fire so you don't ring with the stiffness of someone thinking only of ropes. You took that to heart. Now, as you work, your mind slides easily between the pull in your arm and the memory of cabbage leaves wilting in a pot, the smell of dill rising with the steam. The rhythm in your hands seems warmer when your thoughts are elsewhere. Historians still argue whether bell ringers in this century were ever expected to maintain a precise count of strokes in these mid-morning sequences, or whether the sound was meant to continue until the ringer judged the city to be properly awake. Surviving accounts show both. Some ringers marking tallies in chalk on beams, others speaking of time enough for the frost to settle. Your own measure is simpler when the note begins to feel like it belongs more to the air than to you. You know it's time to pause. You pull again, feeling the clapper's arc smooth and sure. The bell's tone rolls toward the market quarter, just as you said it earlier, carrying into the weave of voices and the thump of baskets set down on benches. You imagine a fishmonger hearing it as he lifts a net from a cart, the sound settling briefly on the silvered scales before drifting off. Inside the belfry, the sound comes back to you a second later in a softened form, caught in the wooden frame and handed back through the floorboards. You can feel it in your boots, a slow, round pulse that reminds you of a heartbeat felt through a wool sleeve. The room carries the note even after the air has let it go, storing it in the joints and pegs for the next pull. You take a sip of kvass, careful not to spill on the boards, and set the bottle back near the post. Its coldness in your mouth feels different now, not biting, but bracing. The faint bread-sour taste anchors you to the work in a way that no warmth could. A draft from the louvers stirs your scarf. It brings with it the layered scents of the city, wood smoke from the baker's oven, the faint musk of horses, a trace of the river's cold breath. These mingle with the dry tang of bronze until the whole belfry smells like the hour itself, neither pure nor unpleasant, but unmistakably morning. You rest the rope for a moment, letting your shoulders drop. The bell sways slightly in its frame, clapper still, as though it too takes a slow breath. Then you set your hands again, steadying your feet, and pull. The note rises, arcs outward, and disappears into the streets, where the day will use it however it chooses. The lantern flickers at a change in the draft, then steadies. Your mitten brushes the rope's tassel, now only cool and pliable, no longer stiff with ice. That small change feels like proof that you and the bell have both come through the hardest part of the morning. You give one more careful pull, not as part of a sequence, but as a punctuation. The bell answers with a tone that lingers just a breath longer before letting go. You listen until even the floor stops humming. The city is awake now. The frost has been named. The ropes sway faintly in the pause, their motion more from memory than from your hand. You watch them for a moment, the way they lean toward one another and then apart, like slow dancers who know the steps too well to think about them. The hemp has darkened, where melted frost sank in earlier. Those patches look almost polished now in the growing daylight. You reach out with the mitten and let your fingertips brush the fibers not gripping, just reminding them you are still here. The belfry air has changed since before dawn. It is no warmer, but it feels less sharp in the chest, as if the frost has tired of announcing itself and settled into a quieter form. The light slipping through the louvers is brighter now, silvering the frost still clinging in their corners. A breeze threads through, enough to stir the loose strands at the rope ends and set a faint ticking in the icicles still clinging to the far wall. You take the rope again and give it a measured pull. The clapper swings cleanly, the bell's tone now fully itself, round, sure, and without the brittle edge it had in the early cold. The sound pours outward in an even ribbon, carried far enough that you can imagine it passing over the market stalls and down to the frozen riverbank. Somewhere out there, the note will brush against shutters and walls, perhaps even stir a dog from its place by the stove. In 18th century Moscow, it was understood that the mid-morning ringing was not meant to hurry anyone. It was a signal of presence, not demand, a way of saying the day had established itself and that all could move within it at their own pace. The bell was part of that rhythm, not separate from it. You recall a quirky saying from your mentor: if you can feel the bell's tone in your knees, you've been standing right. You smile under your scarf, thinking how you once doubted it, until one morning you notice the faint tremor in your legs after a particularly smooth sequence. Today, you feel it again just enough to know you're in step with the bell's weight and the floor's answering hum. Historians still argue whether these later sequences were kept strictly to a set number of strokes, or if the ringer was free to lengthen or shorten them according to weather, attendance, or the bell's condition. Some surviving instructions are exact 30 pulls, a pause, another 30, while others say simply, ring as befits the morning. You've always preferred the latter, trusting the sound to tell you when it has said enough. The next pull is slow, deliberate, your weight leaning back just enough to feel the rope's answer through both arms. The clapper meets the bronze with a gentle authority, and the tone fills the belfry before spilling outward. You hold the rope a moment longer, feeling the vibration fade like the last warmth from a cup. Your gaze drifts to the floorboards, where tiny puddles have formed from the ice you knocked loose earlier. In the cold, each one has already skinned over again, catching the light like dull mirrors. The broom in the corner waits for later, when you will sweep them toward the gaps so they can join the tower's hidden store of winter water below. You glance toward the street through a louver's gap. The figures below move with purpose, now shoppers in layered shawls, men with crates balanced on sledges, a pair of children chasing each other's footprints. No one looks up, yet the bell's sound reaches them all the same, wrapping itself into the business of their morning. You take another sip of K-Bass, finding the ring of ice at the bottle's neck has thickened. It cracks with the same neat sound as before when you tilt it, and the liquid touches your tongue with its bread-sour familiarity. You wipe your mouth with the back of your mitten, careful not to dampen the scarf. The rope feels warmer now in your hands, its fibers pliant and friendly. You work another short sequence, each pull spaced enough to let the notes stand alone. The floor creaks in a pattern that matches your rhythm, as though the tower itself approves of your pacing. When you pause, the silence afterward feels content, not empty. The ropes hang still, the louvers hold their pale light, and the bell rests in its frame, quiet but ready. You breathe in the airwood, rope, metal, and the faint trace of smoke carried up from the street, and let it settle in your chest. Another pull, another tone rolling outward like a long exhale. You imagine it mingling with the sound of footsteps on snow, with the scrape of sled runners, with the low voices bartering in the market. For a few moments, all of it is part of one slow, steady conversation. The quiet that follows a sequence is its own instrument. You let the rope hang, your hands open inside the mittens as if releasing a small bird you were never trying to keep. The belfry receives the pause with a low contentment. Boards stop their murmuring. The lantern, forgotten now by the brighter day, steadies into a small, stubborn sun no larger than a thumb. Even the draft through the louvers seems to consider its manners, moving without the sly sprints it tried before dawn. You listen to the space where the note just was, to the thin aftervoice that lingers in the wood and then climbs down into the floor as though seeking a warmer room. You stand very still, counting breaths the way a field counts fence posts, not for mathematics, only for company. The rope brushes your coat once and then remembers to be a line again. In this interval, your body takes attendant's knees, present, shoulders present, toes present and opinionated. You shift your weight a finger's width and hear almost nothing change. That is the sign that the morning has crossed a threshold. Earlier, the tower spoke at every movement. Now, it accepts your presence the way a bench accepts a familiar sitter. The bell rests in its frame like a thought decided and set aside. You lean an elbow to the post and ride the last ghost of vibration, a soft tremor like a cat walking across a table in another room. Outside, the city writes in small script, 2 carts passing, a door protesting its hinge, a merchant clapping gloved hands to summon his warmth from hiding. The bell is absent in those sounds and present in them as well. It isn't speaking, but it already taught the sentences they use. In Moscow of this century, mid-morning belongs to such middles. Not the great feast peals, not the alarm, not the deep evening calls, simply the sound that chooses to say still here, without asking anything in return. A simple, solid fact comes to mind while you rest. Russian Orthodox ringing has patterns with names a slow, even Blagovest. More layered Trezvan. Solemn Perbor rung one bell after another, like footsteps counted out loud. Your work this morning stays near the first, letting the city hold the day without ceremony. It pleases you to remember that even the larger forms were built to be carried by hands like yours, on mornings like this, in towers that give nothing away except to patient ears. The knowledge does not change your breath, but it upgrades your stillness from idle to earned. You bring the K-Bass to your lip and find the usual trick, waiting a thin lid of ice that cracks with a neat confidence as the bottle tips. The liquid travels with the deliberation of winter and arrives tasting of bread that learned to float. A quirky comfort lives here. More than one ringer you've known put a tiny clove or peppercorn under the tongue during long silences, claiming the spice rang the mouth so the bell's next entry would feel friendlier. You tried it once and discovered the principal effect was making you too aware of your own saliva. The habit didn't stay, but the memory does. It keeps you equal parts amused and awake. Historians still argue whether ringers in this period measured pauses with anything more obedient than their own scent sandglasses, noted in a few ledgers. crude weights for counting out a rope's swing, even the shadow of a louver slat on a mark scratched into stone. Documents disagree, and the city's weather would have bullied any system that forgot to be humble. You trust the method most likely to survive frost and interruption. Breathe, listen, repeat. When the silence feels like a clean table and not an empty room, you begin again. You lower the bottle, set it by the post, and test the rope with 2 fingers. The hemp feels warmer than the air only by a whisper, but enough to pass a small private message to your palm. Somewhere in the timbers, a pin answers with a sound that isn't truly a sound, just the idea of wood admitting that it has shifted an eyelash. You let your eyes follow the rope upward to the clapper's tail, to the leather knot that has remembered its shape through more winters than your knees appreciate, and to the bell's round edge, where water has collected in a necklace of very small beads. They catch the day like a row of tiny windows. You give yourself to the pause for one more full breath. A pigeon takes a step along a beam and changes its mind. The louvers offer the smell of horse and bread and river, layered in that order today. Far off, another tower tries a cautious pair of notes, a neighbor clearing its throat by your example. You accept the reply without pride. Bells borrow courage from one another the way houses borrow warmth from a shared wall. You smile into the scarf, which decides for its own reasons to remember last week's onion. The memory is homely and therefore useful. When motion returns, it returns as a polite suggestion rather than a command. You shift your weight, not back but down, as if telling the floor a quiet joke. The rope tightens without complaint. The clapper answers by leaning forward to see whether you meant it. You meant it. Metal meets bronze with the soft authority of a signature made in good ink. The note blooms not bright, not loud, only thorough, and the belfry remembers that it was built for exactly this moment, repeated exactly this many times. The silence that follows does not feel dismissed. It feels employed. Another sequence waits, but you do not rush to hire it. The mid-morning quiet has calibrated your hands, and they prefer the work at this temperature of slowness. You let 2 heartbeats pass, and then a third, choosing the space not with the arithmetic of clocks, but with the arithmetic of breath. The bell agrees. You can tell by how the room's corners keep participating after the stroke is gone, as if the sound had taught them posture. Outside, a woman sets her basket down and stands a little taller without knowing why. A baker knocks ash from the lip of a stove and hears perhaps nothing particular. Still, his day sits more squarely on its stool. You think what you always think in these pauses and then pretend you did not think it. There are trades more urgent than this, and trades more praised, but none that ask for steadiness in such a tidy, negotiable portion of the world. A rope, a bell, a room that neither scolds nor flatters, a city willing to be addressed, frost that is patient when you are patient with it, hands that will be useful again tomorrow. You let the thought pass without ornament. Then you take the rope as if greeting a familiar neighbor, and you begin again. The first pull after a long pause feels different, heavier, not from the bell's weight, but from the way silence has settled into the rope. You draw it towards you, and the clapper moves with a kind of sleepy grace, striking bronze in a note that blooms slowly, as though stretching before taking its place in the air. The tone rolls out through the louvers, brushing over the frost that clings to their edges, and the city absorbs it without fuss. The floor responds with a deep, quiet hum under your boots, steady and calm. That vibration rises through your legs like warm water seeping into cold cloth. You keep your hands on the rope after the strike, feeling the clapper's small after motions forward, back, forward again, each less than the last, until it rests once more. The daylight beyond the louvers has shifted toward a softer gray, the kind that promises snow later. The clouds above the rooftops are thick but not hurried, as if they mean to take their time before deciding whether to break. A small flurry of pigeons bursts upward from a nearby roofline, turns in an uneven arc, and settles again. The bell's sound may have startled them, or perhaps it was only the shadow of a passing crow. In 18th century Moscow, bells carried not only across districts, but also into the countryside beyond. On certain still days, their tones could drift for miles, mingling with the calls of other towers, until the air itself felt braided with sound. A skilled ringer might sense when the wind favored their reach, adjusting the pace so notes would meet the breeze instead of fighting it. That was knowledge learned not from books, but for mornings and evenings spent listening more than speaking. You think of a quirky bit of lore told to you one winter by a visiting ringer from a monastery. He swore that if you watched the pigeons closely during a sequence, you could read the mood of your bell if they wheeled away and kept their distance. It meant the tone was sharp with cold. If they stayed and shifted only slightly, the bell was warm and content. You never decided whether to believe him, but you've kept the habit of watching. Today, the pigeons seem indifferent, which you take as a quiet compliment. Historians still argue whether mid-morning ringing in parish towers like this had any fixed length in winter, or if it simply continued until the ringer felt the city had heard enough. Surviving notes are vague, a good space of time, until the air is well set, and offer no universal rule. Your own measure, shaped by the cold, is to stop before the rope grows damp again from frost melting into sweat. You work another pull, this one a touch firmer, and the bell answers with a tone that sits low and even, like a chair well balanced on its legs. It leaves the belfry with quiet authority, crossing the river where the sound picks up a faint, hollow sweetness before curling back toward you. The echo feels like the city acknowledging receipt. The rope feels supple now, the fibers loosened by the morning's work. Your mittens have grown slightly damp at the palms, but the wool still holds the warmth you've built. You shift your stance, leaning a little more on your back foot for the next pull, and the clapper responds with ease. Each strike feels less like an effort and more like a conversation. Below, movement in the street has thickened. Sledges creak over snow-packed lanes. Voices call short greetings, and a dog barks at something unseen. None of it interrupts the bell's rhythm. If anything, these sounds seem to weave themselves between the strikes, filling the spaces you leave. You pause for a sip of kvass. The bottle's neck has iced again, and you chip it with your teeth before the liquid passes over your tongue. It is as cool as the air, but the familiar taste carries a small weight that steadies you. You set the bottle back against the post and return to the rope. The next pull sends another wave of sound over the rooftops. You imagine it catching in the folds of laundry frozen stiff on a line, brushing against the wool cap of a boy carrying bread, echoing faintly inside a stable where a horse stamps and blows steam into the cold. You don't expect anyone to think of you when they hear it. The sound belongs to the city, not to the ringer. The belfry holds the fading note for a moment longer than you expect, the wood and stone conspiring to keep it close. When it finally leaves, the quiet that follows feels layered rather than empty, full of all the small noises the bell had momentarily hushed. You breathe in that quiet, and it smells of rope, cold bronze, and the faint trace of smoke. You ready yourself for the next pull, not out of urgency, but because the rope in your hand feels like a question you already know how to answer. The pigeons on the rafters shift again, not in alarm this time, but with the sleepy restlessness of creatures adjusting to a new patch of light. Their wings stir the frost that has collected on the beams, sending down a soft drift of crystals that scatter across your coat. You watch one small feather gray, with the faintest edge of white spiral down, and land on the rope in front of your mitten. It clings there for a moment, before a tremor from the next pull sends it to the floor. You draw the rope, and the clapper meets the bronze with the calm certainty of a routine long practiced. The tone rises and rolls outward, its edge rounded by the morning's warmer air in the belfry. You can hear it catch in the louvers, where frost melts in tiny drops that patter against the boards before vanishing into the gaps. That quiet patter is the counterpoint to the bell's voice, a rhythm that belongs only to winter mornings. Beyond the louvers, the sky has shifted to a flat, pale silver. Snow has begun to fall not in earnest, but in thin, deliberate flakes that drift straight down. Each one seems to move at its own pace, independent of the others, until they vanish into roofs, shoulders, and streets. The sound of the bell seems to push through them without resistance, as though the flakes are too light to be an obstacle. In 18th-century Moscow, ringers knew the difference between how a bell sounded on a clear day and on a snow day. Snow softened the air, thickened it, made the tone feel closer even when it traveled far. A trained ear could tell from the first strike that the weather had turned, just as easily as someone looking from a window. You recall a quirky warning from an older ringer. Never let your gaze follow a single snowflake all the way to the ground. While ringing, it will steal your rhythm. You smile at the memory and catch yourself halfway through doing exactly that, eyes tracking a flake past the rope, the boards, and nearly to your boots. You pull your focus back to the work with a small shake of your head. Historians still argue whether towers like this were ever used to signal snowfall intentionally. There are mentions in diaries of the bell speaking to the snow, but no clear proof. Some believe it was poetic description. Others suspect it was an informal custom to mark the season's first true storm. Either way, your bell's voice today feels like it's addressing the flakes as much as the city. You pull again, and the tone threads itself through the snowfall, disappearing into the soft white curtain. The echo that returns from the river is more muffled now, as if the snow has caught part of it and kept it for itself. The pigeons murmur in the rafters, their small sounds swallowed quickly by the room's open air. You pause and breathe in deeply through the scarf. The air tastes of wood smoke carried from somewhere in the market quarter, mixed with the faint sharpness of new snow. That scent settles in your chest like something both cold and clean, and you feel steadier for it. The rope's fibers, warmed from your hands and the morning's work, have become pliant enough to curve around your mitten without resisting. You take another measured pull, letting the clapper swing in a longer arc this time. The bell answers with a note that feels deeper, as though the snow outside has pulled its voice a little closer to the ground. Through the louvers, you see a woman walking with a basket balanced on one hip. She pauses for a moment at the sound, her face lifting slightly toward the tower, before she continues on. You wonder if she carries bread, cloth, or simply the weight of errands waiting at home. You rest the rope for a moment and roll your shoulders. The snow continues its slow fall, laying a thin layer on the ledges and ropes just within reach of the louvers. Soon, you'll have to brush it away before it freezes there. But for now, it rests quietly, and you are content to let it be. Another pull sends the bell's voice out into the white air. You listen as it fades, the sound in the snow sharing the same unhurried pace. You lean a little toward the louver that faces the river and take the rope in both hands, not to pull harder, but to feel the clapper's path more exactly. The next strike goes out like a stone set softly on still water. You listen for the second circle. The echo, you know, will return from the Moskva's winter skin. It takes its time. Echoes raised in cold do not hustle. They stroll back wearing fur, late but perfectly dressed. When it arrives, it is rounded and polite, a familiar guest who knocks before opening the door. You feel it more than hear it at first, a pressure in the air that pushes against your coat and then slips past you into the rafters. The river, half bridged by ice and half open where the current argues successfully, turns sound into a traveling companion. The smooth sheets give the note a slide. The open water gives it a hollow sweetness. The snow along the banks gives it shoes soft enough not to wake the houses. You send another pull, and again the echo returns, as if it had only gone to the corner and back for bread. The belfry seems to breathe in with it, wood answering in a low hum you can feel through your boots. You shift your stance to aim a fraction more toward that side. It's not dramatic, only a shoulder's width, a tilt of the hips, a new honesty in the line of rope from your hands to the clapper's tail. The next tone rolls out, unhurried, and the river gives it back with a little more substance, like soup that has decided to include barley. The return finds your ear and then your chest. For a moment, you imagine the echo is ringing you. The thought makes you smile into the scarf, which takes the compliment and offers you back a breath warmed by wool and memory. In 18th century Moscow, winter sound carried along the river corridors the way smoke used chimneys directly and with gratitude. Parish towers near the water learned the trick of turning a degree or two toward the current when the air was still, so that bells tossed their voices to the river first and let the river do the rest. No one wrote that down as law. It was simply craft, towers listening to water, and ringers learning to let geography do a portion of the work. A quirky bit of tower wisdom comes to mind. An old ringer claimed you could season the echo by counting to the same number each time between pulls 3 for a lean river, 5 for a wide one, so the returning sound would settle neatly under the next note like a second blanket. He insisted the river preferred tidiness. Perhaps he was right. You try a quiet count to 4 and discover, unsurprisingly, that numbers behave in winter exactly as they do in summer. Still, the act of counting gives your hands a steadier patience, and sometimes that is all the magic a trick needs. Historians still argue whether towers consciously choreographed echo into their local Zvan patterns, or whether the effect was a happy accident embraced after the fact. The ledgers are stingy. They praise a bell's reach and a ringer's steadiness, but they seldom name the river as a collaborator. Yet any ear with a morning free could hear what the water was doing. So the truth likely lived between ink and practice noticed, used, insufficiently bragged about. You pull again. The clapper meets the bronze with a measured kiss, and the note steps out into the gray. When it returns, it wears the river's coat, the slight hollow that makes the sound feel older than it is, as if it had picked up a story on the way there and back. The echo doesn't mirror the main tones so much as round it, sanding off haste, encouraging the morning to remember its posture. You hold the rope a moment, letting your body learn the timing, the little delay that says the water has done its part. Through the louvers, you catch the river's surface in a slim, metal-colored stripe between roofs. Where ice lies solid, the snow on top is clean and undisturbed, except for a few feral tracks. Where water runs, the stripe shivers like a thin blade. On that moving line, the bell makes a second life for itself, a dimmer twin that keeps up without overtaking. A crow crosses low, hesitates above the open water, as if the echo had asked it a question, then continues without answering. Crows rarely indulge acoustics. They have their own business. You work a small sequence, 4 strokes, a longer breath, 4 more, giving the echo room to show its shape. The belfry approves by saying very little. The rope slides in your mittens with a familiar rasp. The floor offers that slow, deep thrum that has passed for conversation since the tower was young. Between your pulls, tiny beads of melt at the bell's lip quiver and drop, each finding its way to a board seam where other winter waters wait. You pause to sip kvass. The ring of ice at the bottle's mouth has grown again, crisp and ceremonial. It cracks obediently, and the drink goes down with the same small courage it always provides. You set the bottle by the post and take the line once more. The next note travels, meets the river, and returns with the soft-backed weight you've been courting. It fills the room without raising its voice, and slips past you into the timbers, taking the cold's edge with it for a second or two. Another quiet fact visits. Sound behaves like a good neighbor. In winter, it carries a dish over the fence and brings the plate back clean. You thank it by not rushing. The river thanks you by not swallowing more than it returns. Everything in this conversation prefers manners. A small snow begins again, powder that wanders sideways and thinks better of landing. The flakes hover in the alley of air between tower and sky, undecided. The echo moves through them, wearing them for an instant like a veil before they fall away. You remember the warning about following a single flake and keep your eyes on the rope. The flake follows you anyway and ends up as a cold kiss on your mitten. Point made. You try the count to 4 once more. 1, 2, 3. The pull on 4 and find the timing suits the river's current today. The echo arrives like an accompaniment you did not request, but accept gladly. You ride it for a short run of strokes, then widen the pause and let the room taste what it feels like when sound chooses not to return. The difference is instructive. Without the river's answer, the silence has walls. With it, the silence has a window. You prefer the window. Somewhere below, a sledge crosses a narrow bridge. The runners squeal, not with complaint, but with the surprise of wood on colder wood. Your note alights there a moment and moves on. The horse stamps. The driver clucks his tongue, and the echo delivers to both of them a softened copy of what you sent. No one looks up. They rarely do. But the river keeps your company, and politely gives it back. You let the rope rest. The bell's lip gleams with a new row of tiny beads. The breeze shifts and brings you the mixed air of water and smoke and iron. For a few breaths, you stand still and let the echo come without a strike to meet. It arrives anyway, a memory of your last tone, reduced and sweetened by distance. You receive it like a letter written in your own hand and posted back to you by a friendly clerk. Then you set your feet, find the rope, and write another sentence on the river. It reads itself and replies on time. You answer by not hurrying the next word. Morning proceeds, mannerly, on both banks. The smell of candle tallow has been faintly present since you first climbed the stairs. But now it grows more distinct. It comes from the stub you keep wedged in a small iron bracket on the post, hardly a source of heat, barely enough to soften the air near your gloves, yet constant in its quiet offering. The wick burns with a steady, blunt flame, sending a thin curl of smoke that finds the draft and disappears toward the louvers. You watch it for a moment between pulls, the way it stretches, bends, and finally unravels into nothing. The scent itself is heavy, almost sweet in the back of your throat. In a tower like this, it mingles with every other thing, bronze, rope, frost, and the dry dust of old wood, until you stop noticing it consciously. Yet when the breeze shifts and brings it toward you, it feels like an old friend arriving at the door, carrying news you don't need to hear but welcome anyway. You give the rope a measured draw. The clapper moves without stiffness, its arc smooth and obedient. The bell's voice rolls out and then returns from the river a moment later, carrying with it a soft echo that seems to wear the candle's scent in its warmth. You know that's impossible, but the thought amuses you enough to let it linger. In 18th century Moscow, candles of tallow or beeswax were common in belfries despite the drafts. Ringers used them less for light than for a token of warmth, especially in the hours before sunrise. A stub could outlast several sequences if trimmed carefully, and its slow, quiet burning gave the ringer something to look at when the ropes in the dark became too familiar to study. A quirky habit of one old ringer you knew comes to mind. He would drip a few drops of hot tallow onto his mittens, claiming it made them more resistant to frost and less likely to catch on the rope. Whether it worked or not, his hands always smelled faintly of candle smoke, even in the market. You tried it once yourself and found it made the wool stiff and a little slick, better in theory than in practice. Historians still argue whether such candles were ever an official provision from the church or simply brought by ringers themselves. Inventories sometimes list candles for the bell loft, but just as often omit them, suggesting they were considered a personal matter. In any case, the stub in its bracket beside you feels more like your own than something belonging to the tower. You lean close enough to the flame to feel its tiny warmth on your cheek. It's no match for the cold in the room, but it holds a psychological weight that is entirely out of proportion to its size. The flicker paints a small gold patch on the rope as you take it in hand again, almost as if the bell itself were being blessed before it speaks. The next pull sends the bell's tone outward, and you time your breath with the motion so that the exhale carries past the candle. For an instant, the flame bends toward the louvers, chasing your breath's path. The smoke that follows threads up into the belfry's rafters and is lost among the frost. You notice that the puddle of melted tallow around the wick has begun to cool at the edges, forming a pale crust that clings to the iron cup. A drop falls and lands on the board below, where it freezes almost at once into a waxy bead. You imagine how many such beads have gathered in the hidden cracks of the floor over years. Tiny archives of every candle ever burned here. Another pull, another tone, this one warmer, fuller, as if the candle's small flame had encouraged the bronze. You know better than to think a stub of tallow can change metal, yet the mind accepts such connections without complaint. You take a sip of kvass, the bottle's rim cold against your mitten. When you set it down, your eyes fall again on the candle. Its flame wavers as the draft shifts, then rights itself, as stubborn about standing as the bell is about ringing. Outside, the snow is thicker now, muting the view beyond the louvers. The bell's sound travels into it anyway, and you fancy that some of it must return changed, just as smoke changes after passing through the flame. When you next take the rope, the candle's light catches in the small droplets along the bell's lip, turning them into tiny coins. They tremble with each vibration, yet hold their place, waiting for the next strike. The bell speaks, the coins shiver, and the candle burns on, keeping its own steady rhythm beside yours. You keep one glove off now and again, letting your bare fingers rest briefly near the candle flame. The heat is modest, hardly more than a polite handshake, but it has a way of convincing the joints to loosen. You turn your hand slowly, warming first the palm, then the backs of your fingers, as if conducting a miniature ceremony no one else will ever attend. The air around the flame smells faintly of the tallow's animal origin, a scent that carries the memory of kitchens and winter stews, even here above the nave. The rope hums under your other hand, the fibers tight from the cold but still willing. You give a gentle pull, feeling the bell's weight shift above you, the clapper moving with the slow authority of habit. The tone drifts out into the snow-heavy air, and you picture it slipping between flakes like a guest weaving through a polite crowd. The echo returns softer now, the snowfall cushioning its edges, so that it seems more a memory than an answer. In 18th century Moscow, ringers learned to read weather in sound as much as in sight. A heavy snowfall made bells seem further away, even if you stood in the belfry itself. Parishioners on the ground would hear the tone dimmer, shorter-lived, as though the snow were politely escorting it into the ground before it could wander. Ringers adjusted by pulling with a touch more emphasis not to shout, but to keep the syllable whole before the flakes chewed it into smaller sounds. A quirky tale among older bell towers claimed that snow could be trained to carry sound farther if you rang in a perfectly steady pattern for an entire morning. The logic was absent. Perhaps it was nothing more than an excuse for disciplined practice. But a few ringers swore that on certain days, after hours of even pacing, the snow seemed to stop stealing so much of the tone. Historians still argue whether snowfall truly alters sound travel enough to merit such adjustment, or if the change lies mostly in the listener's mind. Records from winter services rarely mention it, suggesting either that it was too ordinary to note or too subjective to confirm. Still, anyone who has rung through a curtain of snow will admit it feels different under the rope. You let the echo fade entirely before you pull again, savoring the small hush that follows. The candle's flame dances at the edge of your vision, catching in the corner of your eye each time the bell vibrates. You shift your stance slightly, allowing your ungloved hand another few seconds near the heat until the skin begins to tingle. Then the glove goes back on, clumsy but essential, and you return your grip to the rope. The floor under you creaks with a sound that is both wood and frost, the planks expanding and contracting in some private conversation. You glance at the joist where a small ridge of wax has built up from past seasons. Each strip and freeze a record, like tally marks left without intention. The next pull feels steadier, your warmed fingers curling without protest. The bell's note emerges rounder, and even though the snow still swallows part of it, you imagine it going farther than before. The echo, when it returns, is so gentle that it might be mistaken for the creak of the tower itself, yet you know its shape well enough to greet it by name. You think of the candle again. It has shortened, the stub now little more than a thumb's length above its pool of melt. Its light reaches only a handspan into the gloom, yet it claims that space with quiet authority. You find yourself ringing in time with its flicker, not deliberately, but as if both of you are part of the same slow machinery. Another tone, another softened echo. You lean briefly toward the louvers, watching the snowfall blur the outline of a distant roof. The flakes settle on the sill before the draft carries them in, and they vanish on the warmer air from your breath. A few melt on your mittens, leaving tiny dark spots before freezing again. The rope waits, the candle burns, the snow falls. You pull once more, sending the bell's voice out into the white. Somewhere below, the sound lands on a traveler's ear, perhaps muted, perhaps carrying a little farther than you expect. Either way, it has gone, and in a moment, a gentler version will come home to you. The wind has shifted just enough to slip through the louvers in a new direction, brushing past your cheek with a colder edge than before. You turn your face slightly, letting the scarf catch most of it. The candle flame dips, and then steadies again, stubborn in its narrow circle of light. The rope sways faintly between your hands, not from the wind, but from the residual motion of your last pull. You draw once more, the bell's voice rolling out with a familiar weight. The echo returns softer, and you notice it fading quicker than in the earlier hours. Snowfall, you think, has become thicker, each flake a small curtain. In 18th century Moscow, heavy snow often muted bells to such a degree that people in distant lanes might hear only a faint hum. Churches accepted this as part of winter's order, making no effort to compensate beyond simply ringing longer. The goal was not to force the sound, but to let persistence carry it through. A quirky note from one parish record mentions a ringer who claimed he could scare the snow into silence by ringing in short bursts instead of the usual long peals. Neighbors apparently found it annoying, and the experiment was not repeated. Historians still argue whether shorter peals in winter were ever officially prescribed. Surviving schedules show no seasonal variation, but oral accounts from rural towers hint at occasional adjustments when snow was particularly heavy. You shift your grip and pull again, feeling the rope's fibers warmed by your mittens. The bell swings, its bronze rim catching a dim trace of light from the candle below. Outside, the snow has erased the line between roof and street. Everything wears the same pale covering. You pause for a moment, letting the silence grow, broken only by the faint tick of melting frost falling from the beams. Another pull, another muted answer from the city, and you settle into the rhythm again. The boards beneath your feet feel different now, less like wood, and more like a part of your own stance, warmed just slightly by hours of shifting your weight. You glance at the candle. The stub is nearly gone, its flame smaller but still certain in its place. The rope waits in your hands, steady, smelling faintly of old hemp and winter air. You pull again. The bell swings with its usual slow authority, the sound rolling outward into the snow-thick night. The echo returns almost reluctantly, like a neighbor answering a question they already know you'll ask again. In 18th-century Moscow, winter ringing often meant leaning into a slower pace, both to conserve the ringer's energy and to let the sound carry more distinctly in the cold air. Some churches even instructed ringers to breathe with the bell, using their exhale to time the next pull. One quirky habit you recall from an old colleague: he would hum under his breath with each stroke, claiming it reminded the bell how to sing. Whether it helped or not, it made the long hours pass with a little more company. Historians still argue whether such personal customs, humming, pacing by breath, were widely shared or purely individual quirk. The written record ignores them, but oral histories suggest each ringer had some private method to keep the body and mind aligned in the cold. You shift your mittens on the rope and pull again. The bronze voice answers, snow catches it, and somewhere beyond the white veil, someone hears it. You imagine they know who is ringing, even without seeing your face. The candle wavers once more. You nod to it in silent acknowledgement before returning your eyes to the rope. Another pull, another patient sound into the frozen dark. Your shoulders feel the weight of the morning now, a dull ache that settles in without complaint. The belfry's air is sharper here, the frost clinging stubbornly to the inner edges of the louvers. Each exhale drifts upward, faint and slow, disappearing into the beams above. You draw the rope again. The bell's voice leaves in a round, measured tone, its bronze surface dampened slightly by the cold. The echo is faint but clean, returning like a thin ribbon of sound. In 18th-century Moscow, bell ringers were often noted for their endurance more than their strength. Surviving winter shifts required steady pacing, layered clothing, and an acceptance that no amount of movement would truly chase away the chill. One quirky practice recorded in a minor parish ledger tells of a ringer who kept a small lump of ginger in his cheek for warmth. He insisted the spice heated the breath, enough to keep frost from gathering on his scarf. Whether it worked or not, the habit made him easy to spot at the tavern later, his scarf always faintly scented. Historians still argue whether such remedies were personal eccentricities or remnants of older folk medicine carried into church work. Mentions are too scattered to confirm any tradition, but they appear often enough to suggest they were not rare. You pause between strokes, flexing your fingers inside your mittens. The candle gives off a last bright flare as the wick shortens toward its base. You pull once more, the sound carrying into the stillness outside. Snow presses close, yet the tone persists, steady and familiar, until it fades again into the white. The candle has burned so low now that its light barely reaches the rope in your hands. You keep it more for company than for sight. The rhythm of pulling the bell has long since settled into your muscles. The floor creaks with each shift of your weight, the sound softened by the wool of your boots. You pull, and the bell swings. The tone emerges with that same slow dignity, pressing outward into the night. The echo is weaker than before, as though the snow is thickening further, closing in around the city. In 18th-century Moscow, winter nights like this could quiet even the busiest districts. Bell ringing served as both a timekeeper and a reminder that the church still stood watch while the streets lay empty. A quirky bit of tower lore claimed that if you rang while snow was falling straight down with no wind, the sound would settle into the drifts and be heard days later when the snow melted. Of course, there's no record of anyone actually proving it, but the idea persisted among apprentices. Historians still argue whether ringers in smaller parishes ever adjusted their schedules purely for weather. Written orders emphasize religious timings, but anecdotal accounts suggest the frost sometimes dictated its own rhythm. You glance once at the candle's last thin flame before turning your attention back to the rope. Another pull, another patient voice in the dark, and the tower feels just a little warmer for the sound. The candle gives its final flicker and dies, leaving the belfry in a soft, natural dark. Moonlight filters through the snow-blurred louvers, casting pale, uneven shapes on the floor. You don't need your eyes much now. The rope's place is fixed in your memory and your grip. You pull, feeling the bell's weight lean away, then return. The sound leaves with quiet confidence, its edges softened instantly by the thick snow. The echo that comes back is small but steady, like a nod from across the square. In 18th century Moscow, bell ringers often worked by the light of the moon once candles burned out, saving tallow for more urgent hours. Snowfall could brighten the scene slightly, reflecting what little light the sky offered. A quirky saying passed among older ringers claimed that the moon rings with you, meaning that cold, clear nights carried sound farther simply because the ringer felt less alone in the tower. Whether or not it was true, the thought kept many hands steady through long shifts. Historians still argue whether lunar phases or clear skies truly affected perceived volume, or if it was a trick of human expectation. Few records mention the connection, but personal journals hint that some ringers preferred to work by moonlight when possible. You take another pull, the rope swaying back into place as the bell settles. The dark feels calm, not empty, and the snow outside continues its slow, unhurried fall. The cold has settled deeper into your boots, numbing your toes until they feel more like part of the floor than your own body. You shift your stance slightly, listening to the quiet scrape of wool against wood, before reaching for the rope again. You pull, the bell responds, and the sound drifts into the snowy dark. The echo is faint but present, a reminder that somewhere beyond the whiteness, the city still listens. In 18th century Moscow, bell towers were sometimes the highest vantage point in a district, allowing the ringer to see weather fronts approach before anyone at street level noticed. Some ringers used this height to judge when a storm might end, timing their final peals to greet a clearing sky. A quirky tale survives of a ringer who swore that stomping his feet in rhythm with the bell kept both himself and the bell awake. Neighbors below said it made no difference to the sound, but it became his signature. Historians still argue whether these idiosyncratic habits were practical or purely superstitious. Surviving records focus on the schedule and style of ringing, leaving the personal details mostly to oral memory. You give the rope another slow pull, watching the shadow of its swing move across the wall in the dim moonlight. Outside, the snow thickens again, muting the city further. The sound fades, but the rhythm in your hands remains the same. Your breath feels heavier now, each exhale a cloud that lingers briefly before drifting toward the rafters. The rope hangs quietly between pulls, its fibers slightly rough against the mittens. You roll your shoulders, then lean back for another stroke. The bell answers with its measured, low voice. Snow swallows the first edges of the sound, but the core tone pushes on, steady and unhurried. The echo is little more than a soft acknowledgement somewhere beyond the square. In 18th century Moscow, the final hour of a winter ringing shift was often the most challenging. Fatigue set in, not from the weight of the work, but from the cold's gradual seep into every layer of clothing. Endurance was a quiet skill, keeping the pace without rushing just to be done. One quirky method, mentioned in a single tower diary, involved keeping a pebble in the pocket and rolling it between bare fingers during pauses, the cold stone oddly grounding the ringer in the moment. No one seems to know why it felt helpful, but the note insists it made the last hour bearable. Historians still argue whether this pocket pebble trick was isolated or part of a wider but undocumented habit. Its scarcity in written sources suggests it was likely personal. You draw the rope again, the motion now as natural as breathing. The bell swings, speaks, and returns to stillness. You pause a moment, savoring the quiet before the next sound. The air in the belfry feels denser now, as if the cold itself has weight. You breathe slowly, letting each exhale drift upward in the dim gray light filtering through the louvers. The rope rests patiently in your hands, familiar and worn, its twist unchanged despite the hours. You give one more pull. The bell's deep tone rolls outward into the snowy dark, not urgent, not loud, just present. The echo returns faintly, like a faraway nod. You stand still for a moment, letting the sound dissolve into the air. In 18th century Moscow, a shift's final strokes were often drawn out slightly, allowing the tone to linger in the minds of those who heard it. It was less about ceremony, and more about marking an ending without haste. One quirky note from an old parish ledger describes a ringer who would always take 3 deliberate steps back from the rope after the final pull, as though bowing to the bell. Others in his trade found it odd, but he insisted it sealed the work. Historians still argue whether such gestures held any recognized meaning or were simply personal rituals. With so few references, the debate remains open. You release the rope gently, letting it sway to stillness. The tower creaks softly in the cold, the snow outside falling with the same quiet insistence it had hours ago. The shift is done, but the night continues, and the bell waits for the next call. The belfry is quiet now. Without the bell's voice, the air feels softer, almost hesitant to move. You rest your hands against the rope one last time, feeling the faint warmth where your grip has been for so many hours. The boards beneath your feet hold the memory of each step, each shift of weight, as though they too have kept watch. Outside, the snow continues without pause. It settles on rooftops, in the narrow spaces between chimneys, along the edges of the square far below. In the stillness, the city seems smaller, folded in by its own winter air. You breathe in slowly. The scent of the tower-aged wood, faint smoke from distant chimneys, a trace of cold stone wraps around you. The quiet is not empty. It is full of all the sounds that are resting, waiting for the next time they're called. Somewhere beyond the whiteness, people move inside their homes. A few might think of the bell they heard earlier, its tone carrying just enough to remind them of the hour. Most will let the sound fade into their dreams. You look once more toward the louvers. Snow swirls in the moonlight, each flake unhurried in its fall. The rope stands still now, its work finished. You draw your scarf closer, step lightly toward the narrow stair, and begin the slow descent. The wooden steps creak under your boots. Your hands find the rail, cold and smooth from years of use. Each step takes you closer to the ground, to the warmer air that waits below, but you keep your pace measured. The night holds steady, the bell rests above, and the city sleeps beneath its quiet cover of snow. We hope this slow day at an old trade has been a peaceful escape. If you found it comforting, you may like, share, or leave a thoughtful note, and you can subscribe, so you'll be with us for the next quiet craft from the past. End of script. Sweet dreams.